European Union through culture and creativity, a program which counts with the generous financial support of the European Union. The event also aligns its objective with those of the UN Women Global Afro-Descendant Women Program, designed to connect women of African descent in Africa and the diaspora through comprehensive programming around economic empowerment in the creative industries. Today's event represents a space to acknowledge that gender equality in the cultural and creative industries remain a critical and overarching priority in order to promote diversity, fight against discrimination, foster tolerance, and achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It is now my immense pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Sadia Sanchez-Vegas, Director and Representative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean. Ms. Sanchez-Vegas holds a PhD in Information Science from the University of California at Berkeley, United States. She has more than 20 years of experience in management position and possesses an extensive and solid career management in management, technical cooperation, and international relations. She was the director of the UNESCO Cluster Office in Quito and UNESCO representative for Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela from 2014 to August 2020. As director of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, Ms. Sanchez-Vegas has expressed her commitment to provide strategic and operational leadership for the sub-regional integration and sustainable development of Caribbean island developing state seats as a UNESCO priority group. Ms. Sanchez-Vegas, please, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Aniceto Rodriguez-Ruiz, First Counselor and Head of Cooperation, Delegation of the European Union to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the Cayman Islands. Tony Rodberg, Representative, UN Women Multi-Country Office, Caribbean, and Lemaitre, Director of the Regional Office for Culture in Latin America and the Caribbean. Dear panelists, experts, and cultural and creative professionals from the Caribbean, I am honored to welcome you on behalf of UNESCO to this online debate, Mobilizing Women's Creativity for Sustainable Development and Cultural Policies in the Caribbean today. On May 21st, the day after tomorrow, World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development is observed to celebrate cultural diversity, ensure respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, advocate for tolerance and peace, eradicate the stereotypes, and apply the voices of the most vulnerable and historically long silenced. We also celebrate the contributions of cultural and creative professionals to society and how they contribute to creative dialogue, mutual understanding, and advance the social, environmental, and economic vectors of sustainable development. During uncertainty and crisis, global pandemics, financial crisis, conflicts, and wars, the core values of cultural diversity, equality, and social justice are more pertinent than ever. In this context today, we applaud artists and cultural practitioners for their resilience and contributions to society through the arts and cultural expressions, making us feel connected as humans, inspiring us, and giving us a greater sense of belonging. In the cultural and creative industries, women have a notable role. However, the full realization of women's potential to participate in and contribute to culture, creativity, and the arts is hindered in multiple ways. In the Caribbean societies and worldwide. In the Caribbean societies, often it is compounded by other intersecting factors that lead to inequality, exclusion, and discrimination. culturally sanctioned behaviors, and preconceived and stereotypical notions of traditional gender norms and roles are often openly or subtly manifested, leading to exclusion and unequal opportunities for women. Increased levels of intersectional discrimination are also related to the form of classism that divides society and reproduces social and racial inequalities, which is especially faced by women of African descent and other ethnic minority women. By identifying this, UNESCO has launched gender equality as a global priority for the organization. In the face of existing gender structural inequalities, interinstitutional and multi-layer approaches are most needed to ensure diversity as embraced in the 2005 UNESCO Convention for the protection and promotion of the diversity of cultural expressions. In 2021, last year, UNESCO launched the publication Gender and Creativity Progress on the Precipice. The report sheds light on the progress and challenges that persist in achieving gender equality in the cultural and creative industries worldwide. The conclusions and recommendations include that women in the cultural and creative sectors continue to be worse off than men in terms of the gender nature of employment, relative pay, contractual status, and seniority. Despite existing progress, more efforts are required to achieve gender equal access to and governance of cultural and creative sectors. A renewed focus on policies and measures dealing with safety and well-being in cultural industries is crucial for promoting gender equality, artistic freedom, and the diversity of cultural expression. Finally, moments of crisis increase the vulnerability of specific population groups, including women, and can reinforce the view that women are less central to the creative workforce than men. This is why UNESCO's Transcultura program integrating Cuba, the Caribbean, and the European Union through culture and creativity funded by the European Union has joined hands with UN Women in organizing this first virtual debate today. Today's event brings together renowned artists and cultural practitioners from the Caribbean and invites them to reflect on existing barriers, inequalities, and challenges faced by women in the industry, and to identify women-led innovative action that can help develop gender-responsive public policies to promote a more balanced and inclusive cultural and creative economy in the Caribbean that enhances financial independence, among other expressions of freedom. Finally, I would like to thank all the speakers and partners for their commitment and support to this online debate today. I would also like to applaud all women artists in the Caribbean and those who support women artists for their solid and long-lasting commitment and relentless work in promoting and advocating for more inclusive, diverse, egalitarian, and equitable societies through the power of culture. Thank you. Thank you for your persistences, for not giving up, for your strength, and above all, for your creative work. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I would like to thank Ms. Sanchez Vegas for her inspiring remarks, which have reminded us of the transformative power of culture to produce and present narratives, perspective, and visions that embody freedoms and challenge stereotypes, and how holistic approaches are needed to advance towards the full realization of women's potential to participate in and contribute to culture and creativity, in order to ensure the diversity of cultural expression based on human rights, mutual understanding, and inclusiveness. Thank you very much, Ms. Sanchez Vegas. I have now the honor to introduce and give the floor to Ms. Toni Broadbent, representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office Caribbean. Prior to her current appointment, Ms. Broadbent served as a deputy representative with the Multi-Country Office Caribbean, and before that, she was the team leader of the program Advancing Gender Justice in the Pacific with the UN Women Fiji Multi-Country Office. She also served as the gender specialist for the United Nations Development Program in South Africa and established what is now the UN Women Country Office in Haiti. Ms. Broadbent, you may have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. And it really is a pleasure to be here this morning with all of you. Mr. Aniceto Rodriguez Ruiz, the first counselor and head of cooperation delegation of the European Union to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands, and Cayman Islands. My fantastic colleague, Ms. Sadia Sanchez Vegas, director and representative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, and all of the wonderful and determined artists with us this morning, some of whom may still not be hearing in their language, French. One thing we know is that this is a celebration of the language that transcends the verbal languages that have divided us across the Caribbean: culture, art. Last year, UN Women hosted a global art exhibition, an online auction in New York City, a force for change with UNESCO, which showcased renowned Black women artists from across the world, including the Caribbean. The art exhibition and auction which followed launched the program and partnership to strengthen women's resilience in Africa and the African diaspora by addressing the intersections of race and gender-based discrimination. 50% of the proceeds went to the artists, and the other 50% went to programs such as this that will continue to support the implementation of the UN Women's Afro-Descendant Women's Program. As part of the launch activities, UN Women MCO Caribbean, in collaboration with UNESCO and New York University's Africa House, hosted a discussion entitled "Ain't I a Woman? Black Women, Creativity and Freedom." The discussion celebrated and explored Afro-descendant women's contribution to creative and cultural industries, global social movements, while highlighting the importance of Afro-descendant women's role in sustainable development. Now, we started with the entry point of Afro-descendant women, given that we are in the decade of persons to celebrate persons of African descent. And that is with an understanding that an intersectional lens allows us to better see, better hear, and appreciate all experience. UN Women is pleased to join UNESCO today and its broader Transcultura program and the European Union, the funder of the Transcultura program, for today's online discussion entitled "Mobilizing Women's Creativity for Sustainable Development and Cultural Policies in the Caribbean." When we look at revolutionary freedom and resistance movements across the world, what has been central to their survival, creation, and success was artistic expression. The paintings, the songs, the masking, the warrior chants. These women and men persisted. The spontaneous poetry of their prayers, their calls to arms, and the arc of all feminine bodies, Black bodies at times, all bodies, set for dancing for freedom. Art, as its most raw, is really about dignity and humanity. We always give thanks to Haiti for being the first mover. Without 1804, the abolition of slavery in our region would have been delayed. How did it begin? They say a woman creative. Art is what keeps us grounded and sentient, even in the ugliest of circumstances. And the Caribbean has a vibrant community of artists, many of whom seek to tap into regional and international networks, not only to enhance their standard of living, but to also share their stories with the world. For a long time across the world, there seemed to be a fear of women's creativity and what it could possibly unleash: wild women. Well, this fear can motivate violence, unfortunately, but creativity has been a critical means of development. Culture is a critical element of development, and it is absolutely necessary for women to be involved in the development of the policies that uplift us. Mobilizing women's creativity makes good sense for our region on many levels. Women's cultural and creative contributions in our region have been a long part of our rich and historical creative legacies that have existed for centuries. Yet the cultural and creative sectors are underfunded and underformalized in our region. Development is not just about physical infrastructure. It is not just economic metrics. It is about the infrastructure that enables creativity, communities that foster cultural dynamism, and challenge us to create the vision for this region and the world that our ancestors, regardless of where they came from and how they came here, wanted for us. It is imperative for multilaterals, government institutions, all sectors and communities across the Caribbean to collaborate to preserve our region's vibrant cultures and creativity. And this begins with strengthening our institutions and developing the inclusive policies in conjunction with social protection systems so artists can create and maintain the dignity of a livelihood that bolsters them and their families. So congratulations to the European Union for your commitment to creativity and gender equality. Your actions continuously demonstrate that you know both gender equality and creativity are critical to sustainable development. Congratulations to our sister agency, UNESCO, for your dogged commitment to Caribbean artists. And congratulations to you, the artists who continue to show up. We look forward to continued collaboration with our sister agency, UNESCO, and we'll soon be announcing some of the next steps in our collaboration. So watch these collective spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Broadbeer, for your inspiring and empowering words. As you are highlighted that development is not just about the physical infrastructure, it's not just about pure economic growth, because development is also about culture, creativity, and communities. Culture is a critical element of development and is absolutely necessary for women to be involved in the development of public policies that assist us, of course. And first of all, because art is about dignity and humanity. So thank you very much for your words. And I have now the privilege to introduce and give the floor to Mr. Aniceto Rodriguez Ruiz, First Counselor, Head of Cooperation of the Delegation of the European Union to Jamaica, Belize, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Island, and Cayman Islands. Mr. Rodriguez Ruiz has over 32 years of working experience for the European Commission. In headquarters, he was Deputy Head of Unit for Human Resources and Deputy Head of Unit for Bilateral Relations with Latin America and the Caribbean at the Directorate General for International Partnership and Development in the European Commission, before being posted in 2017 as Head of Cooperation in Haiti. Other posts in the EU delegation held before were in Argentina and Nicaragua, covering other Central American countries. Please, Mr. Rodriguez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can hear me. Dr. Sadia Sanchez Vegas, Director and Representative of UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean. Mrs. Tony Broadbeer, representative of UN Women Multi-Country Office, all the panelists, participants joining us from all across the region. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, buenos dias. I greet you on behalf of Ambassador Marianne van Steen, who's a firm believer in the value of the creative and cultural industries, but she is unable to join us this morning at this morning's event. The Caribbean has a rich tradition in the cultural and creative industries, and women have and continue to play critical roles, which don't necessarily get the pride of place they deserve. Uneven and unequal access to steady and decent employment, insufficient career development opportunities, lack of capital are some of the barriers women face as they navigate in the creative sector. Additionally, it's hard to overstate how the pandemic has compounded these issues. At the European Union, we are actively integrating gender and culture into our programs and projects as a cross-cutting issue in a push to drive human, social, and economic development. Therefore, the European Union is pleased to be partnering with UNESCO, with UN Women, and with all the distinguished participants today to think through how we can design an ecosystem that will allow women to make a way for themselves in the cultural and creative industries. This event forms part of the wider Transcultura program, which aims to strengthen cultural integration within and across Cuba, the Caribbean, and the European Union. With funding support of 15 million euros, we are hopeful that the 4 years Transcultura program will move the needle forward in helping to build out a creative ecosystem that is gender sensitive and gender responsive. Additionally, Transcultura complements the recently launched EU-funded Creative Caribbean, an ecosystem of play for growth and development project being implemented in partnership with UNESCO, the University of West Indies, CARICOM, and the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States. With funding support of 3 million euros, Creative Caribbean aims to equip creatives with the tools to grow more globally competitive business and enhance their professional development. The European Union truly believes in the value of culture, and we are excited about the possibilities for the region as we all push to build back better from the pandemic. I hope that today's event will generate insights and actionable recommendations that will help to develop more inclusive cultural and creative industries. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your intervention, Mr. Rodriguez. In particular, I would like to stress, as you mentioned, that integrating gender and culture into programs and policies, it's fundamental in a push to drive human, social, and economic development. And of course, it's pivotal to overcome some of the barriers that women creatives face, like, for example, uneven and unequal access to study and decent employment, insufficient career development opportunities, and lack of capital, which are, of course, some of the impediments that women are facing as they have to navigate in the culture and creative sector. Thank you very much. I would like to reiterate my sincerest gratitude to Ms. Sanchez-Vegas, to Ms. Broadbeer, and to Mr. Rodriguez for their opening remark to this event, Mobilizing Women Creativity for Sustainable Development and Cultural Policies in the Caribbean, which will be structured around 3 main topics. The first one, women training and capacity development. The second, bridging the gender divide in the digital environment. And the third one, the participation of women in cultural life. It is now the moment to give the floor to our invited panelists and to Ms. Broadbeer, who will be moderating the discussion during the 3 sessions of the debate. Ms. Broadbeer, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alessandro, and thank you, colleagues, for sticking it out with us. So again, buenos dias, bonjour, ça passe, good morning. We're really looking forward to hearing from the artists now. So as my colleagues has indicated, and we understand this particular agenda to be, we're building out on the conversations. We don't just have conversations for conversation's sake. We have these conversations to lead to action. This is advocacy in action. So I am very pleased today to introduce our panelists. And I want to spend just a little time so that everyone knows who you are. They deserve to know exactly who you are for session 1 when we talk about women training and capacity development. We have Angelina Fellov Hernandez from Cuba, who is the founder and coordinator of Afro Diverso. Ms. Fellov Hernandez is a woman of African descent, born in Alta Habana, Boyaros, Cuba. She has attended different courses throughout her life, which were instrumental in strengthening her resilience to transform herself into an entrepreneur. The art of transformation as an artistic expression has allowed her to insert herself into many communities and institutional cultural spaces with the aim of making lesbian and bisexual Afro-descendant women visible. Ms. Fellov Hernandez is founder and coordinator of Afro Diverso, an itinerant and collaborative initiative, which systematically works at the community level with diverse age groups through different community-based educational, cultural, and awareness-raising activities. Really wonderful to have you with us this morning. We also have Peta Odini Sutherland. Now, Peta, you let me know if you prefer Odini or Peta, okay? From St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who is the president of the Fashion Association of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Ms. Sutherland, if I had a piece of your work, I would have worn it today. Ms. Sutherland is a fashion designer and marketing professional currently living in St. Vincent. In 2008, she moved to London to pursue a degree at the London College of Fashion. In 2014, she debuted her brand and has gone on to show collections in various countries. In June 2017, she received a Fashion Excellence Award from the Caribbean Style and Culture Organization in Washington, D.C. And in November 2019, she became the first president of the newly formed Fashion Association of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in March 2022, Peta Odini became the first Caribbean brand selected to showcase as part of the Canex Presents at Portugal Fashion Week in Porto. Congratulations, and we look forward to hearing from you. We also have Ramona Henry Wine from the beautiful Emerald Isle of St. Lucia, who is the executive director and of the Cultural Development Foundation. Ms. Henry Wine is an administrator by profession, trained in the UK. She holds a postgraduate diploma in management and a bachelor's honors degree in banking and economics, as well as a law and master of business administration. Wow. She is a former dancer who also acted in the theater productions. Her contribution to the arts and culture have been as a member of the National Carnival Queen Pageant Committee. Ms. Henry Wynne has also judged several poetry competitions, as well as junior pageants over the years. She works as an administrator at the senior level for over 17 years, coordinating the operations and human resource departments of statutory bodies and private sector organizations in St. Lucia and the United Kingdom. It is such a pleasure to have this fantastic panel with us this morning. And I'm going to ask our colleagues who are managing the internet opportunity to pin the three panelists so that we can see all three of them while they are speaking. So I believe that the first question goes to Ms. Fellov Hernandez, who the reason I'm asking for the panelists to be pinned is I am not seeing her. I am seeing her now. Fantastic. Thank you. There you are with the transcultura background. So based on your knowledge and experience, what is the role played by civil society organizations and how should they be engaged with within the Caribbean region for reinforcing gender-oriented capacity strengthening activities and mainstreaming gender equality in cultural policies?
Bueno, buenos días. Agradecimientos por la participación en este evento a Transcultura, UNESCO, y bueno, y esta invitación que nos han hecho. ¿Escuchan bien? Sí, ok. Y o sea, agradeciendo la invitación de Transcultura de aquí de UNESCO, y bueno, y a ustedes por estar intercambiando en este evento importante que va a ser muy enriquecedor y muy prometedor para estrategias futuras como alianza entre proyectos y entre iniciativas creativas del Caribe. Bueno, Afrodiverso es una iniciativa que surge con la necesidad de empoderar a las mujeres negras afrodescendientes en un espacio cultural comunitario. O sea, somos una iniciativa que estamos sistemáticamente trabajando con las comunidades, los barrios, en el descubrimiento de talentos, el descubrimiento de estas personas que a través del arte nos provocan esto de ser itinerantes y colaborativos. Esta iniciativa tiene tres premisas fundamentales, que son el arte, la salud y la comunidad. Y en estas tres premisas tenemos iniciativas infantiles, que hacemos trabajo comunitario con los niños y adolescentes, buscando siempre rescatar las tradiciones culturales desde nuestra afrodescendencia, desde un sentido general. O sea, para nada somos exclusivos, incluimos a todos los niños, pero hacemos énfasis en estas temáticas de la racialidad. Además, hacemos un previo diagnóstico en las comunidades, cuando somos itinerantes, en las comunidades hacemos un previo diagnóstico de qué es lo que vamos allí a hacer en la comunidad, haciendo unos conversatorios, un intercambio con los decisores, con los factores de las comunidades, para llegar a esas comunidades ya con una previa síntesis, por lo menos, de lo que vamos a hacer. Y trabajamos con ellos directamente con teniendo en cuenta con su vivencia a nivel de los barrios. Y ahí vamos convocándolos a hacer diferentes actividades artísticas desde su creatividad, o sea, desde su iniciativa como niños. Y de ahí rescatamos y los derivamos a diferentes instituciones culturales donde ellos puedan ampliar lo que saben, en compañía de sus padres, o en algunas ocasiones nosotros hacemos acompañamiento para que ellos se queden solamente a nivel de barrio, o sea, de manera que se pierda un talento, y así lo hacemos con adolescentes y con los niños. Y trabajamos siempre desde el arte, o sea, hacemos de clan, o sea, nos ponemos vestiduras un poco asequibles con estos niños, trabajamos sin fines de lucro, y con los recursos que vamos abonando desde el arte. En estos espacios hacemos siempre afroferias, le llamamos afroferias, derivadas del proyecto afrodescendiente, y convocamos a diferentes proyectos afrodescendientes para que en estas afroferias también tengamos una economía solidaria, donde cada cual pueda tener acceso a vender o a poner en esos espacios su arte, y una manera de apoyarnos económicamente desde el punto de vista local como tal. El transformismo dentro del espacio afrodiverso es una manifestación artística que ahora hace un tiempo, y ahora en Cuba está todavía bastante invisible. O sea, es una manera de empoderar a la mujer negra afrodescendiente desde este arte, de una manera de que podemos entrar a diferentes comunidades e intercambiar con las personas, llevando un enfoque de género. O sea, cuántas manifestaciones puede hacer la mujer dentro de las tantas masculinidades que hay, sin para nada pretender que la masculinidad nos da fuerza en ese sentido. Porque a veces ahí tenemos que hacer conversatorios con los diferentes barrios, porque en el imaginario está que la mujer lesbiana o bisexual, en un estereotipo de una de las tantas masculinidades sociales que hay, se queda encasillado ahí, y eso es una cosa que hay que ir rompiendo, y son aprendizajes que en la comunidad vamos intercambiando. Nosotros como sociedad civil estamos inmersos en hacer constantemente acciones comunitarias que permitan, o sea, claro, implantar políticas públicas que nos permitan no insertados, sino estar horizontalmente con la comunidad. No crear un espacio de que somos un proyecto afrodiverso exclusivo, somos un proyecto inclusivo, y trabajamos con todos los grupos etarios. Con el adulto mayor también trabajamos en el arte, movimiento danzonero. Hemos trabajado con el movimiento danzonero, que es una de las tradiciones culturales cubanas, que es el danzón, que es una manifestación artística que hoy en día hay bastantes movimientos cancioneros en Cuba y en La Habana. Y hemos tenido la posibilidad de insertarnos con ellos y ver cómo dentro de sus proyecciones artísticas, de sus espacios, hay cierta, respetando los espacios, lógicamente, hay todavía cierto patriarcado dentro de sus formas de convivencia. Y nosotros desde este arte de campo mismo le hacemos sin agredirse un espacio, le hacemos una convocatoria a que hay tantos tipos de masculinidad como tantos tipos de feminidad. Por tanto, la saya no significa mujer y el pantalón no significa hombre. Y el color blanco no significa, y el color negro no es el que opaca y todo. Entonces, hacemos trabajo muy meticuloso porque hay espacios que tienen su idiosincrasia y por tanto es importante respetar estos espacios. Pero vamos por ahí haciendo diferentes actividades en las que también desde nuestros conocimientos que hemos adquirido en los diferentes talleres a través porque somos devenidos a redes sociales comunitarias del Centro Nacional de Educación Sexual y todas las herramientas que hemos adquirido en esos espacios, la red barrera afrodescendiente que también nos ha permitido formarnos como educadores populares, como promotores de salud, nos ha permitido entonces hacer estos intercambios con más herramientas. En estos momentos ha logrado Afrodiverso tener espacios culturales, no diría únicos porque me gustaría que fueran más promisorios a nivel nacional, pero en espacios religiosos hemos hecho conversatorio con estos espacios culturales y nos han permitido insertarnos en esos espacios proyectos LGTB, o sea, el arte del transformismo ahí como espacio novedoso, que es importante insertarnos en estos espacios donde el transformismo masculino sigue invisible, por tanto, es un espacio comunitario donde nos permite visibilizar, máximo como mujeres negras y afrodescendientes, independientemente de la orientación sexual e identidad de género, pero es importante que la comunidad se sienta con nosotros de una manera horizontal, eso es importante. También tenemos otros espacios que hemos logrado como iniciativa, que es en instituciones estatales, como el Cine Teatro Acapulco, que tenemos una peña cultural hace como ya más de 4 años, que también es otro logro como proyecto, insertarnos ahí e invitar a diferentes manifestaciones artísticas para que nos apoyen. Entonces, de cierta manera, he hecho, a grosso modo, un pequeño panorama de lo que hace Afrodiverso en estos momentos.
Thank you so much. There's so much that civil society does that often many of us have to follow. What you've been talking about, the incredible work that you're doing with children, the assessments that you do in communities so that people can really be seen, and also using the lens, and that's important. It's not about exclusion, but it is about highlighting some groups that have been previously excluded and how can we bring them positively in the discussion around Afro-descendant people, and having those groups, especially children, lead their engagements and meeting them where they are, having those exchanges with the community about gender identity and sexual orientation and the ways in which that will change norms and beliefs about how people see themselves and others. That's incredible work. And we can see very clearly how that work that you're doing as a member of civil society would be critical to strengthen activities and mainstreaming for gender equality and cultural policies, because the policies have to meet people where they are and have to reflect what people want. So thank you so much for sharing that. Over to Peto Odini Sutherland, our fashion designer on the panel. What are the main challenges, inequalities and gaps that women artists and cultural professionals face, do you think, from your experience, regarding the training and capacity development opportunities that exist within the field of cultural and creative industries? And how have these challenges changed during the COVID-19 pandemic? How has your experience really informed your thoughts on these things?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Tony. Thank you to everyone for having me here. And it's actually Peter Odini, just to throw you off, but that's fine. For this question, actually, I had to speak to a few of my other counterparts because I didn't want it to just be like a fashion focused response. But because my initial thought was that training and capacity development opportunities, I think viable options across the board is just very difficult to find, especially here in the Caribbean. So I guess for women, it might be a twofold challenge because we also have additional challenges that we face working within the creative industry. So I think sometimes it's almost impossible for some to create a viable and financially viable business from their art or for their practice. So I actually spoke with a colleague of mine called Jessica. She is leading up a nonprofit. It's called Beckwith Threadworks, and they're basically a collective of women who come together to manufacture products. And they also have like a boutique. And even from her perspective, she also had the same view that because of the way that the creative industry is undervalued here in the Caribbean, that the opportunities are so scant. I mean, compared to like ICT or even agriculture and tourism, that, you know, they're not anywhere near as great investment being made into the cultural industry. And then what she did say, however, was whenever you do go to these trainings, whether it's business related or whatever, the majority of the participants tend to always be female, which means that we definitely want the opportunity, and there's no lack of interest on our part for this. So I think that is probably one of the major areas where it's literally not just women in creative industries, it's the creative industry to begin with is already undervalued. And then women now have this extra burden sometimes, whether it's you're raising a family or you're trying to do so much on your own, you're the caregiver for your family. So sometimes it gets tricky. And another major issue that we came across in my discussion, well, I should say I came across in my discussions, is that most people the trainings we do have access to, they tend not really to be focused on the creative field, because I found from my own experience running a fashion business, it is completely different from running almost any other business. I mean, my mom is an accountant, so she does my books for me. And she's even said to me one day, like, this process is so much difficult. It's so much more difficult. It's so different. There's so many upfront costs. There's so many things the design process, some people just think you're sketching or something like that, but there's so much more that goes into that just to create a product. And then you're kind of at the whim and fancy of your customer, where they're like, do we like it? Do we not like it? That sort of way. So it's really interesting working in a fashion business. So a lot of the times when we go to these workshops for like business development training, they don't really seem to consider these as like idiosyncrasies. So sometimes you go to the training and then at the end of it, you walk away and you think, I'm not really sure this really is fully applicable to my business per se. So I think the work required for a fashion brand, especially to scale up, is oftentimes a lot more complex, or I guess maybe intricate in some cases, than maybe like a food manufacturer or just like a reseller or retailer. So I think the training many of us have here and the opportunity to have, it doesn't always make the impact that it should. So, and on top of that, when the training is complete, they say goodbye, thank you for coming. And there's not really any follow-up. So there's not really a support system, whether this be financial or otherwise, to help us implement what we might have gotten from this training, especially trying to turn theory into practice. Sometimes you do need that additional guidance and it's not really always there. And for fashion, again, we rely on so many stakeholders. So there's production, there's manufacturing, there's the retailer. We even need management expertise just to kind of get things going. And this is something that we lack a lot. And speaking to another member of the association, Miss Kimya Glasgow, many of us do not have formalized training within the creative industry. Most of us are self-taught. They've things that they've learned from maybe their mothers, their aunts, something that's passed down, something they've seen that they liked, and they've kind of taken up as a hobby, which they're now trying to turn into a business. And then on top of that, to now try and go and do formal study, sometimes this is just, beyond the scope of many persons. So you always have these informal kind of businesses coming up, especially for female entrepreneurs within the creative industry. And I see it a lot with our own members, because most of them are self-taught and they're they're literally running an informal business. And so if you're trying to take that now to go to a bank for an investment or something, they're not going to really spend any time to support this business because they're going to say that's a hobby, or, this is something you're doing in passing. So I think we need to really focus on the training that helps to create a framework to standardize what we do as creatives, and creating this long-term network of support. So it's not just we give you training this week, but something that we can work on, whether it's like I said, even if it's a directory, a network of mentors we can tap into after the fact, people who may have gone through similar things. We can say, okay, what do you think? We don't expect to get all the answers, but it would be nice to at least have some sort of guidance that we can get. And I think that support system is really critical because mentorship is so important. And I think when we listen to a lot of the successful business people out there, mentorship is something that they always speak to. They had this mentor who helped them figure out this, that, or the other. But here in the Caribbean, and especially within, I could say for fashion, for me, I do menswear. And to find another female designer who does menswear, and it's tricky. So who would I really speak to? Even other menswear designers, whether male or female, some of them, they're having their own struggles. So, it's kind of hard. Where do you find with these people? How do you share this information? It would be great if through these organizations, we can get some international input because they've done it, the New York Fashion Weeks. I just came back from Portugal and that was such an amazing experience. And we got to meet a few industry experts there. And they understand, even though it was designer from the Caribbean, it was a designer from the Africa, that kind of a way, the issues and the problems faced by all of us were pretty much similar. So sometimes we need not to just look at the training, but we need to look at what is the support mechanism going forward. So on top of that, now, I think men have had that advantage where it's always been like the boys' club. So the guys are usually in charge of businesses. So they kind of look out for each other. My partner have this operation, we're going to give him this work, that kind of a way. And it's not really the same, especially for creatives. We don't really have that network. We do to some extent collaborate. So, your photographer friend is here, your designer friend is here, your model friend is here. But in terms of financial support, we don't really have that system in place as such. I've been lucky where I actually have benefited from a formal education and also from my work in marketing and stuff like that. So I understand. I actually, I have this idea in my mind. I know exactly what I need to do to build my brand. But at the same time, knowing it in theory and putting it into practice, there's always this huge disconnect. And even when you do start talking about funding and you start speaking to these funding organizations, sometimes it's like the requirements, they eliminate so many people because, again, so many of them are working in this informal business mechanism. And I think the trainings need to kind of target, how do we create almost these hobby craft, informal businesses? How do we shift them more where they have a standard plan? So they know this is what their balance sheets need to look like. This is what they need to be doing so that they can then maybe access more funding, more guidance, and that sort of thing. So I think we always look at these trainings as a short-term solution, but I think we need to be thinking a whole lot more long-term. So for me, I think it's really sad because I have so many ideas, and I know a lot of my other counterparts are the same, but it's either you don't have enough money to do something, or you have the money and you're really not sure, should I be invested in machinery? Should I be invested in raw materials? Should I be going back to school to learn something else? So there's no mentorship, there's no guidance along the way. And I think that is what is really needed to help build the capacity of a lot of these creative industries here. And that is the only way it's going to be sustainable, because you can give somebody $1 million tomorrow, but if they don't know what they're going to do with it, you've literally just thrown away $1 million. So I think training is great. I applaud all the organizations that continue to give training, but we need to be thinking a little bit broader, a little bit more long-term. How does this training benefit the industry in the long term? Yes, we say we've taught someone how to do a business plan. So they've written the business plan. What next? You submit it to something. What happens next? So I think we need to kind of pushing it a little bit further to see, where are we going with this? And how have these challenges changed with COVID? And I actually spoke to one of my friend, Nadia Huggins. She is an excellent photographer, and she's saying, you know, in the creative industry, we're very hands-on. And with COVID, everything has gone online. So now we're faced with this project now where the training, everything is online. But for somebody who's doing fashion, there are many things you just cannot learn online, you know? So it's really difficult. And I think COVID has set us back and kind of widened these gaps now because we don't have that interaction, that kind of meeting of the minds, because creativity is a feeling, it's an emotion, and you can't get that through the computer. I mean, it has facilitated some things, but I think we really need to find a way now. Things seem to be calming now. We need to get back in the room. We need to start talking to each other. So I'm hoping that we would, you know, progress to that point really quickly, but there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm just looking forward to see what happens next. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter Odini. And I'm saying that you say all that your designs are men wear, but I see Rasta Lion that looks very unisex to me. So you have to also market yourself to all of the people who would be willing to take your products. But absolutely incredible points. Very interesting from the perspective of the Beckway Threadworks and the understanding from all of the colleagues that you spoke to that right now the creative industries are undervalued in the Caribbean, and that is something that we absolutely need to work on. And some of that has to do, where do you get the money, how do you do this work? And as you were saying, for many women who, because of gender roles, are considered the major caregivers in their families, how can they make sure their families are taken care of while they create? And social protection is one of the ways in which we need to make sure that that exists. I take your point that the women are showing up to the trainings, but the trainings are not yet focused on the creative fields because there are very clear nuances that you would have to look at and that other creatives would be looking at that someone who is in a different field would not be thinking about. And I'm sure that this translates into the financing opportunities as well when you go for a loan and the banker doesn't quite understand the variances of your business. Many of you are self-taught. But what you're saying about that mentorship and the work after the training, we're hearing, we're going to take that into consideration and definitely see how, at least in the work that we provide, we do that. So I have been mispronouncing a few people's names today, including Miss Ramona Henry Wynn. The question for you, Miss Henry Wynn, is based on your work, how can public policies strengthen and promote gender-oriented capacity development endeavors? And what are the main critical priorities, infrastructure, financing, network creation, and exchange that need to be taken into account and reinforced in policy formulation? I mean, you are a dancer who's also a finance mind and law background. So it's going to be very interesting to hear your thoughts on this.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Madam Moderator. Just listening to the colleagues who went before me, it just dawned on me, gender equality, creative industries, it almost appeared to me like a forced marriage or an arranged marriage, because in the Caribbean context, we are way behind in terms of the creative industries. It is developing at a very slow pace. So a lot of the policies that exist really does not, do much to really drive home the policies that we need, or the ideologies that we need to bring that balance, that equity as far as gender is concerned. To answer the question, public policies are critical in promoting gender empowerment and providing the necessary support against gender discrimination. In keeping with the UN strategic goals and UNESCO Sustainable Development Goal 5, promoting gender at the highest level in a society, strategies and resources that promote gender equity must be a priority. This is extremely important in the Caribbean, St. Lucian creative industries, where most businesses are or managing positions are still very much male dominated. Hence, a creative product tends to express more or less a male narrative of society. For example, if you look around you, and I'm sure a lot of my Caribbean colleagues can agree with me, that most producers and writers in the music industries are male. And most of the subject matter, or a lot of the subject matter, paints a derogatory picture of women in society. Following right behind it is the film and theater industry. They tend to present a sort of stereotypical, outdated portrayal of women, such as the long-suffering wife, in the Caribbean parlance, the drumette slut, as is portrayed in classic Caribbean writings. If financing and opportunity were given to female creatives to express and share the narratives and innovation, there would be less of a homogeneous, sort of outdated and myopic creation and perspective that dominate the creative landscape. This would also provide more points of reference and connections, and thus the collaboration with global landscape, which is making spaces for gender balanced creative industries. I mean, policy is important, very important to guide any facet of life. But what is important is there an awareness? Is there an understanding? Is there an appreciation of the policy that is to bring that equality? And it has to be, generally people must understand what gender equality is all about, how it impacts society, economies, and communities. Because in the absence of that understanding, you will still have gender equality shining through, coming through with that lack of understanding. And I think this should be our starting point, an understanding, awareness, and education as far as gender equality is concerned. For policy implementation to have strong footings or to take wings, public education must be at the cornerstone of everything that we do. In the absence of that, we would have lost the battle. Our societal norms have predicated our thinking that men are superior beings and that a woman's place is in the home. Whilst this narrative is slowly changing and women are beginning to take their places in society at the highest level, it is still not at an equitable or acceptable level in society. So what do? We are still caught in the quagmire of women want to be a very important part or want to do their bit in terms of developing the creative industries. But there are so many restrictions as far as women are concerned. A woman is an artist, a woman is a creative, she still has a family, she still has a husband, she still has kids, she still has her job, she still has parents. All of those things fighting for her attention. Training may come up, opportunities may come up. More often than not, there isn't that safety net, that infrastructure that allows her to get someone or get persons to take care of these responsibilities for her while she goes and develop her skills or hone her skills. So that already is a mitigating factor. And in light of that, we really, it really cannot be something that is left to just develop organically. It has to be deliberate. The policies must be deliberate. The policies must have drivers in order for those things to happen. Women need safe spaces. We need safe spaces for both men and women, but women more so need spaces that they can network and not just left to the whims of and fancies of, persons who decide they want to do something or create some sort of setting that women can network. It has to be organized. There has to be a policy that says, okay, ever so often, there is this networking activity that women can be a part of, and freedom of all of the other responsibilities and the burdens that they carry to be a part of those networking activities. Because it is only through networking with persons who have gone before you, persons who have done what you've done, persons who have had the experience in whatever creative art form that you're interested in, that you can grow and learn. And a lot of those networks do not exist. I mean, creatives, they try their best to come together and create some of these little network pockets, but it is not enough. It has to be deliberate. It has to be driven by policy. It has to be well organized, and it has to be something that is well presented. Has to be well organized, and it has to be something that women see the benefit of and how it can benefit them as individuals as well as society. Another issue we have is that when you look around you, our organizations, from the creative arts sector to business across the board, they are still male dominated. And even when women are at the helm, do we really understand as women what the question or what the issue of gender equality is? Or are we so clouded by what is before us that we are sort of thrown off, or we forget the realities of gender equality that lies before us? So it is really, as I said earlier, it cannot be organic. It has to be, the efforts has to be deliberate. The policies have to be deliberate. It has to be understood at the highest level. Policymakers have to understand, and it is only through that understanding that we can filter through the rest of society and bring that sort of equity balance that we're looking for. Because policy, it's all well and good to have it. They cannot operate in pockets. They all have to work in tandem in order for things to happen and to happen successfully. Balance, you want it. The finances have to come into place. The networking must come in place. The safe spaces must come in place. The care, child care, assistance with financing, with loan funding, all of those things, the creative spaces, the training spaces, they must all come together to ensure that that equity that we're looking for is not just organic, but is deliberate and is driven by policy. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Henry Wynn. I think you proved that it is not a forced marriage at all. It is not necessarily an arranged marriage. Well, many arranged marriages turn out quite well. So it may be arranged marriage that is quite successful. But as you noted, the issues are around the biases that are slightly in our air that we don't necessarily see, so that when the organizations that you spoke to are run mainly by men or women, because just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're gender responsive, you're not thinking about where's the child care coming? How can we be deliberate, as you said, in not only tying the child care to things like that safety net as well. So the child care is one aspect of social protection, but so is the safety net, so that if this particular creative endeavor is not necessarily what the public wants, you are not destitute. And that is also tied to investments, because where are the investments going? Are they going into industries where you find majority women? Are they going into industries that you find majority men? And why? I don't necessarily think that's deliberate, but we do have to be thoughtful about where money is put and that policy guiding everything that is done. The public education being the cornerstone, as you said, is critical. And I have a question now for the group before we wrap up. And it's interesting because Costa Rica seems to be the only country in our region, and actually globally, that does not have an informal sector. And part of this is because of the investment that was made in culture and the cottage industries in particular. And we know that many women are in the informal sector. So it would be great to also learn some more from Costa Rica on this and how they used technical and educational training. I want to ask all of you in the group now, how can technical and vocational education training, or TVET, support the strengthening of a more vibrant cultural and creative sector in the Caribbean? So we can start with you, Angelina Fellov. Why don't we start with you? I'm not sure if the translation is going as clearly as we would like. So while we wait for Angelina, Peter Odini, why don't we go to you first for your thoughts on how we can really make TVET work for the Caribbean?
I think, coming out of what we've all discussed, I think it is definitely something that we have to focus on because, as we've been saying, a lot of the creative practitioners are informally trained. A lot of them, they've started this as almost as a love, a passion, a hobby craft. Some of it is like a side business. So I think we need the training to create that structured framework for persons to know, be able to create a viable living from this. The orange economy, we keep hearing about it. So many countries overseas, they've invested so much in their creatives. I know when I was studying in London, I interned at Peter Jensen. He's from Denmark, and they basically give their designers an annual stipend because they know it is important to have that branding from their country represented in the world. So they actually help them to, create these brands that represent their country because they realize that there is significant benefit to be garnered there. So I think we do need this training, technical, because again, like I said, it's a very hands-on process for many of us. So again, a lot of people, like for fashion, there's pattern cutting, there's something called grading. And this is something I actually wanted to study because it's literally, you'd think if you make one pattern in a size small, the art of taking from small, medium to large, extra large, that within itself, that is like a very specialized technique. And I don't think there's anybody in the region who actually does that. So I think these are the things we need in order to build the capacity of the industry. So I think we just need to tap into our creatives and kind of find out what are the gaps, where are we missing the training, because sometimes just doing training for the sake of training is not going to be enough, because sometimes you do the same training 2 and 3 times and you're missing something that could be something very simple that would actually be what would take you to the next step. So I think it's just to create a more focused target of what is the long-term goal and what exactly do we need to get there, and then you formulate your training plans along that kind of plan, I think. Yes.
Thank you so much for that. And it's true, the investment from the country. Ms. Henry Wynn, do you have any thoughts on this before we go as well to Ms. Fellov? And I see that there is a question, a hand raised, and I just made a note. Colleagues, please use the Q&A feature to type your questions so that we can then ask it of the panelists. Go ahead, Ms. Henry Wynn.
Yes, thank you. I believe there is need for support. However, I'm sure it's from not just from a St. Lucian context, but from a Caribbean context, we have not really done much in terms of our education priority list. As far as I'm from a St. Lucian perspective, I can say that the priority list was created based on the needs of the public sector. Now that we have a growing or developing creative industries, there needs to be that revisiting of that priority list to ensure that the creative industries is featured very highly on that priority list for training, but at the external or local training. And once that is done, then it will filter down to what TVET does, because at the moment they have very few areas as far as the creative industries is concerned for training, and it is really not accessible to your average creative because it is quite costly. And as we all know, our creatives are really struggling in terms of, making their businesses work, much less trying to get the necessary or pay for the necessary training to develop the industry. So I believe there is need for support, more support for the creative sector as far as TVET is concerned. But I believe too that it has to be driven by the powers that be in terms of changing that narrative, changing the landscape for training for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. That's critical. So Ms. Fellov, are you able to contribute your thoughts as well to this? This particular question, great.
sea, la educación, la formación técnica es de gran ayuda, porque fortalece fortalece la cultura de la población y de las mujeres en general en esta industria creativa. Es importante, los fondos son muy importantes, o sea, en el caso específico de los proyectos afrodescendientes aquí en Cuba, incluyendo afrodiversos, es este tema, que no tenemos fondos ni contamos con alianzas estratégicas con otros proyectos a nivel regional que nos permitan en estas alianzas, o sea, contribuir a ciertos fondos. Tenemos como explicaba, nosotros en la capacitación hacemos o buscamos entre proyectos talleres, conversatorios, con el tema de capacitar a los miembros o a personas de la comunidad sobre manualidades, sobre técnicas de oficios que nos permitan mejorar el tema de la creatividad y el autofinanciamiento de los propios proyectos con estos mínimos recursos que vamos moviendo entre nosotros mismos, que no son suficientes, pero bueno, por lo menos seguimos trabajando, esto no nos hace parar. Y la capacitación es muy importante. Desde la educación superior hasta las capacitaciones que hacemos nosotros a nivel de base, multiplicando nuestros propios conocimientos a las personas para que mejoren el tema de la economía. En este caso hacemos este tema de la economía solidaria, que es entre nosotros mismos ir a otras comunidades a impartir nuestros propios conocimientos, y esto permite mejorar la calidad de vida de las mujeres afrodescendientes en este marco de industria creativa en el Caribe. Pero nos gustaría como tener alianzas con otros proyectos a nivel del Caribe más cercanos para entonces intercambiar saberes y experiencias que nos permitan colaborarnos, nosotros colaborarnos como proyecto y mejorar esto en capacitación, porque capacitamos a lo interno, pero igual sin recursos, con el mínimo de recursos, y esto es importante porque mejora la capacitación.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely. The resources need to be there for the training, critically in all of the work. And in the training, we also need to include some of the socio-historic and socio-cultural work so people can have an understanding. As Ms. Henry Wynn was talking about, sometimes some of the songs that are the most popular are derogatory. Some of the jokes and other art could be challenging for Afro-descendants or Euro-descendants or Indo-descendants from the Caribbean or indigenous people. So just understanding what and how your work may have impact. Thank you all for your time. I know we're rushing, and Ms. Phillips, please type your question into the Q&A. We will make sure that you have a chance to respond to these questions. I'm going to move on to panel 2, and I'm going to tell our colleague, Rohana Ludford, a lot of the Transcultura program is to make sure that there are funding opportunities for artists. So please do go to the website and look at that. And our colleague, Pamela Burnside from the Bahamas, has also offered some opportunities with regards to the Caribbean Development Bank programming. So thank you again, Ms. Fellov, Ms. Henry Wynn, Peter Udini. It was really a pleasure to learn from you and hear from you, and I'm sure we're going to hear much more. So now we move to panel 2, and this panel looks at the issue of bridging the gender divide as it pertains to the digital environment. And the last panel spoke to this. Peter Udini spoke to the fact that some of our most talented creatives are talking about the way in which sometimes the digital space does not allow for our growth. So, or at least the most enabling environment for creativity to be fostered. Colleagues, my name is Tawny Broadbaugh. I understand that sometimes people mispronounce names, and I have no ego around you telling me if I have mispronounced it so that I call you as you should be called. So our panelists for this panel are Sira Taveras. We also have another panelist, and I'm going to just give you a little bit of a background of each of the panelists as well, so you know who you'll be speaking with. Ms. Taveras Pineda is an expert in project management, and the conceptualization of information architecture and creative development. In March 2017, she became the executive director of the Women's Action Research Center, whose mission is to promote women's empowerment in their efforts to achieve full equality and social justice, mainly using technology as a catalyst. She has led the design and development processes for many clients as project manager, and she studied economics at the Technological Institute of Santo Domingo, at the University of Havana, and at York University in Toronto, Canada, as well as in business administration at Seneca College. Ms. Taveras Pineda, it's a pleasure to have you on this panel. We also have Ms. Danielle Diffenthalo, who is a Trinidad and Tobagonian, and has over 25 years experience in the television and film industry. She is committed to telling the Caribbean story through quality dramatic and documentary film and television productions. She produced, directed, and co-wrote several world-renowned television series, and she has worked with Trinidad and Tobago Television, the UK-based production company, Bandug Productions, and the Trinidad production house, Bahamian Limited. Ms. Diffenthalo's numerous credits include educational, environmental, and corporate projects for local, regional, and international audiences. And she's produced and directed several music videos for some of the biggest names in the soca industry. Ms. Diffenthalo is the 2019 Ansa McCall Caribbean Awards laureate for Arts and Letters. It's a pleasure to have you with us as well this morning, going into afternoon for some of us in the Southern Caribbean. Last but not least, we have the first male on our panels today, Mr. Richard Natou from Jamaica, who's a visual artist. And it's always a pleasure to have allies in this conversation. Men and women make gender equality happen. Mr. Natou has always had an interest in color, texture, form, and shape. He thinks about the human experience as a universal seeking, whether immersion in nature, connection to the sense of wholeness, or finding any kind of internal peace. Processing fear, sadness, or isolation, we're all seeking solutions and facing similar challenges. He has entered and been successful in several of the National Gallery's premier exhibitions, as well as other exhibitions, which include Lost in the Echo in 2016, Sensory 2019, Fragility 2019, and Fragility 2 in 2019. And most recently, his tetrahedron in 2021. Mr. Natou is a graduate of the School of Architecture at the University of Technology, Jamaica, and a recipient of the 2020 Prime Minister Youth Awards in the category of Arts and Culture. What a fantastic panel we have this morning. So the first question goes to Ms. Taveras Pineda. How, according with your knowledge and experience, do you think the digital transformation and the COVID-19 pandemic, how has that affected women in the creative field? And what are the main imbalances and inequalities that women artists and cultural and creative professionals face in the digital environment? How can policies and measures be conceived and designed to address these challenges, fostering more gender equality in the digital environment?
Buenos días. Gracias por permitirme estar aquí. Mire, yo quiero empezar haciendo una mirada general de los problemas que la transformación digital sumado a la pandemia del COVID afecta a las mujeres. Porque la pandemia generó una crisis más allá de la sanitaria y que va a perdurar más. Es una crisis en nuestra forma de comunicación, de relacionarnos a todos los niveles, con la familia, con los amigos, con el trabajo y en las formas de producción, distribución y acceso y participación. Porque la COVID profundizó, por ejemplo, para empezar, el tema de los cuidados de las mujeres, que ya la panelista anterior había tratado. ¿Quién cuida? ¿Quién está cuidando la casa? ¿Quién cuidó los enfermos? Todo el tema de los cuidados volvió a ser un issue enorme para las mujeres por la pandemia. Estaba ahí, pero la pandemia hizo que se convirtiera en un tema mayor. Es un tema con el que venimos trabajando durante los últimos 20 años, pero con avances moderados y que ahora vemos la necesidad de avanzar más rápidamente, sobre todo el tema de la economía del cuidado y la corresponsabilidad familiar. Pero después, además de eso, todas las formas análogas de distribución y transmisión del arte y la cultura desaparecieron de repente con el aislamiento de la pandemia. Cerraron los museos, cerraron los cines, cerraron los bares, cerraron los restaurantes, las galerías de arte, en fin, no había acceso a los espacios públicos. ¿Y qué pasó? Que volcamos todo nuestro foco sobre las tecnologías de comunicación. De repente todo el mundo estaba en Zoom, todo el mundo estaba en los chats, todo el mundo estaba utilizando herramientas que si habían venido avanzando en nuestros países, era un cambio lento y con limitaciones y con barreras que veníamos arrastrando las mujeres. Primero, desde mi punto de vista, porque se había estado produciendo una transformación digital sin pensar en nosotras las mujeres. Se había diseñado entornos en línea que permiten que prospere la misoginia, algoritmos que nos discriminan, teletrabajo sin normas claras, y todo eso estaba ahí, ¿verdad? A esto le sumamos que más gente usando las redes, más personas utilizando la tecnología y bien llegó la explosión de la violencia contra las mujeres en el espacio digital, que es la misma violencia que sufrimos en el espacio físico que se traslada al espacio digital. A nivel casi mundial, el 40% de las mujeres que utilizan tecnología han informado haber sido objeto de algún tipo de conducta violenta en el Internet. Eso lo dice en el último informe de la Unidad de Inteligencia de The Economist. Y en América Latina, África, Oriente Medio y Asia, al menos 8 de cada 10 mujeres sufren violencia en el entorno digital. O sea, es grave lo que pasa en el entorno digital frente a la violencia que la mujer y que le hace un espacio hostil para nosotras. Amnesty International hizo un experimento con el Troll Plateau Project para construir, crowdsource, una base de datos sobre el abuso en línea contra las mujeres. Y el estudio muestra que como grupo, las mujeres de color, negras, asias, latinas y mestizas, tenían un 34% más de probabilidades de ser mencionadas en tweets ofensivos que las mujeres blancas. Las mujeres negras fueron objeto de abusos en línea de manera desproporcionada, con un 84% más de probabilidad de ser mencionadas en tweets abusivos. Y las latinas tenemos un 81% de probabilidad de recibir amenazas específicas físicas en comparación con mujeres blancas. Entonces, para ponerlo en palabras de Asima Doria, la ex gerente de políticas de la Web Foundation, el mundo digital se ha convertido en un nuevo frente de asalto a la libertad y el poder de las mujeres. Entonces, esto hay que enfrentarlo. Yo sigo conversando sobre los temas, ¿verdad? Y toda la complicación que tiene para todas las mujeres el mundo digital. Y tenemos que tocar entonces las brechas de acceso, de producción y de uso que ya teníamos las mujeres. Se han hecho estudios sobre el tema de la brecha digital. La misma UNESCO ha venido por años trabajando y produciendo data importante sobre el tema y sabemos que la brecha no se está cerrando y la COVID ha aumentado la brecha. Las mujeres continuamos estando subrepresentadas en la producción de la tecnología, pero sobre todo en nuestros niveles de habilidades digitales, que son las capacidades necesarias para poder apropiarnos de las tecnologías y hacer uso efectivo de las herramientas digitales para mejorar nuestra calidad de vida a través de su uso y su desarrollo. Encima de todo esto, está el control de la tecnología y los contenidos que se están produciendo. ¿A quién pertenecen realmente los contenidos que colocamos en las plataformas de distribución? ¿Quién controla su acceso? ¿Bajo qué parámetros se están desarrollando los algoritmos que me permiten a mí y a las mujeres artistas llegar al usuario, al cliente? Todo esto es la problemática. Toda esta problemática hay que verla de conjunto, hay que trabajarla al mismo tiempo. Y sin embargo, a pesar de todo esto, yo soy partidaria de que las nuevas tecnologías de la información y la comunicación y las tecnologías emergentes representan una enorme oportunidad para todas las mujeres, las artistas, las creadoras. Rompamos con los sesgos, la discriminación, la limitación sobre nuestras oportunidades y con ello contribuir a crear una sociedad más equitativa y justa. Pero para ello tenemos que exigir a los gobiernos desplegar planes nacionales de cierre de la brecha de género con los recursos necesarios para poder lograrlo, enfrentar políticas públicas eficientes la violencia de género, y desde la sociedad civil deberíamos impulsar un movimiento ciudadano para garantizar una transformación digital con perspectiva de género enfocada en el bien común. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. That was a lot and a lot of really important things for us to marinate on a little bit more. I mean, starting from where are women and which women? Who is taking care of the elderly? Who is taking care of the sick? Who's taking care of the children? We know from the data that's been collected around unpaid care work, which is what it's generally called, that it increased 2 times for women more than it did for men. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was still 3 times more generally for women than it was for men. So we need to promote sharing the care. We need faster progress because we have slow change and limited change, as you said. These online environments are really becoming another front of assault, as you said. We cannot have the violence that is perpetrated in our physical spaces transferred to this online environment. We need safe spaces for people to do business, for people to share their creativity and feel comfortable doing so. And that you highlighted the ways in which different women, because all women are not the same, how different women are facing these kinds of challenges. And the algorithms, many of us have stepped into those machines that are supposed to be unbiased when we travel in the days where travel was very frequent, and they're feeling your hair or they're feeling something because they're not accustomed to having Afro-descendant-like hair as the norm. So those who are making the algorithms may not even be aware of their biases and how this affects the way in which we live and the way in which art is able to really proliferate online. And that access to the digital world is still class-based. The majority of the people in the Caribbean still do not have access to the digital space. And as you said, we need governments to be able to close that gap. We need public policies that are efficient across the board. In Jamaica, and Mr. Natu, we coming to you next, there's a saying, everything is everything. And it's true. If we don't address the gender-based violence in one sphere, we're not going to address it anywhere else. If we don't address the care economy, that also leads to the gender-based violence. That leads to the child protection challenges we see. And civil society needs to continue to do what we see, what Ms. Fellov's organization is doing in Cuba, is getting to the people, doing that public awareness that Ms. Wynn also spoke to, and agitating to make sure that these gaps are filled and that the voices of people are foundational in how those gaps are filled. So, Richard Natu, based on your experience, how can trainings and capacity development initiatives contribute to closing the gender divide in the digital environment?
Okay, so greetings. I just want to say first that, how grateful I am and privileged to be here speaking, in this panel amongst all these powerful women. So the digital gender divide. So the digital gender divide, what it does is that it hinders gender equality for women, especially with the the fast-paced advancement of information and communication technologies. Hence, it's an urgent issue to address because we want to ensure that while this digital transformation is taking place, the benefits are equally distributed, because what we don't want is society being more dependent on digital technology without all our women being able to participate fully in this new digital economy. So basically, as all the other panelists were saying, what I'm saying here is that, by not addressing the digital gender gap, digital technologies may, instead of reduce, actually increase gender inequalities. So there are 3 components to the that I see with the gender divide. And the first one is, the access and the use of digital technologies and the internet, the development of skills needed to use digital technologies and to participate in their design and production, and the advancement of women to visible leadership and decision-making roles within the digital sector. So with that in mind, I want to look at each component individually and see what trainings and initiatives can be implemented to help close the gap. So access. So let's talk about access and the use of digital technologies and the internet. So what came as a surprise to me was actually realizing that women have less access to digital technologies and the internet than men. I really didn't know this. While I was speaking to some of my peers, a lot of them were totally unaware either. So I'm actually, it's actually a really good thing. It's a really great thing that we're on these panels talking about these issues. And so a lot of women women have less access to digital technologies and the internet than men, and especially certain groups of women, such as elderly women who live in rural areas and those who are disabled. No, as I said before, I was surprised at first seeing the statistic, but after taking just a minute to look back, I realized just how true this was. And especially looking back at when I used to spend time with my family in rural St. Mary in Jamaica, around the time when internet access and smartphones had just started to gain popularity. It was most of my male cousins who had this type of access. It was not my aunts, not my female cousins. It was my male cousins who had the phones, and they were the ones who had this type of access. And I mean, they all have smartphones now, but but what's happened is that their male counterparts, they were privileged to that access. So they use that technology a lot more and with a lot more efficiency because they got it first. So when the Internet Telecommunications Union in 2017, it created estimates that suggest that women globally are 12% likely than men to use the internet, or are less likely than men to own a mobile phone. That hit very close to home. Because then when others started to realize all this that has been happening. So what can we do to ensure that all women and girls have access to these digital technologies? So, with the idea of affordability, safety, and security of digital technologies in mind, we have to abolish these barriers to women's access, and use of these technologies. So one of the barriers include the availability of the relevant infrastructure. And what I mean is that the availability of network coverage or electricity. And this is a big issue, especially for women in poor or remote areas, because looking back at my family in St. Mary years ago, I realized that one of the reasons, my male cousins were the first ones to have these smartphones was because they were the ones who would travel to the city and to do business, as they had access to this kind of infrastructure, And so some might argue that, hey, there are public facilities that give this kind of internet access, like internet cafes per se. But what happens is that a lot of time these facilities they're way too far away, or they might not be in safe areas. And then there's a cost and the affordability aspect, which is the biggest barrier to owning, even a mobile phone. That is the cost to buy the phone and to purchase data plans to keep it going. Now, this cost, it affects, women greater because generally, their income is generally less than men. Women get paid less. So what happens is that, they have to be more conscious of price, and they end up losing out or getting lower quality devices that end up hindering their access. And another barrier is safety and security. And now the thing about digital technologies is that as panelists before me was mentioned, is that it has the power to empower and disempower. Disempowerment can come from online harassment and abuse, and this creates a barrier within the digital space, because what that does is that it makes the digital space now appear, it makes it intimidating, as women have experienced online abuse, and from harassment to trolling to stalking and sexual intimidation. So you know, a way that we can start to break down this barrier and flip the script is, you know, to create trainings that show that how the digital space can be used to enhance personal security, such as with, you know, panic button apps, you know, emergency credit and helplines. So the other point is the development of skills. So due to poor access to education compared to men, what happens is that a lot of women end up not having the skills and confidence to engage effectively with digital technologies. Now, what we have to do is to combat this issue. What we have to do to combat this issue is to develop educational programs that promote equal participation of women and girls in, you know, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics studies, you know, and you know, some of these trainings can include entrepreneurship training, programming, web development, and application development. Because what it is that while, you know, we have important skills, you know, such as numeracy and content language, those need to be a part of the curriculum. But, you know, digital skills and problem solving, you know, those are things that have to be prioritized within this digital age. In addition to creating these programs, you know, what we have to do is to create initiatives that support women's digital rights and their digital citizenship. You know, what we want for women is long life learning. So to constantly, what we want is long life learning. So constantly investing in these programs brings us closer to just that. In addition, with the impact of, you know, COVID speeding up the digitization of economies, we see how essential digital skills are becoming and how essential it is that everyone is equally trained to interact within this new world. And I know the last point that I want to mention is visible women leaders in the digital sector. I came across this interview some time ago where this developer called Fiona, they didn't give her a last name. She was saying that while on campus, they used to discourage her by saying that they have never seen any successful girls in technology, you know, and they even went further and said that Facebook was made by a man. So what was her place in this digital environment? I think Fiona is from Uganda. And this is a part of the problem, because the thing is that it's not a situation where women aren't making groundbreaking achievements in technologies. The fact that, you know, a lot of these women aren't being highlighted, you know, in the same regard that men are highlighted. So hence, you know, increasing the visibility of women in leadership in the digital sector is definitely the way forward. So Criado Perez, in her book, Invisible Women Exposing the Data Bias in a World Designed by Men, advocates for this, and she advocates for increased female representation in leadership, as she quotes, "Women simply don't forget that women exist as easily as men often seem to." And during my personal development as an artist, all my mentors were women. All my main sources of inspiration came from women. Most of the people who have helped me advance to next levels of my career, they were women. So I just want to take some time to mention how grateful I am that many of the new art initiatives coming out of Jamaica, such as, you know, Kingston on the Edge, you know, and then, you know, you have Kingston Creative, you have Susie Wong Presents, now you have the Sky Gallery, you have Olympia Gallery, and you have Rebel Women Lit, amongst many more. They have women at the forefront, you know, and I think as men, it's very important to do everything in our part to empower our women and to close that gap, because it has been them, the women, all this time who have been empowering us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Natu. And colleagues, if your hand is up, please make sure to put your question in the question and answer section. It's incredible. As you said, most of your mentors were women, and you really addressed that access gap, you know, and why we have the digital divide. My aunt is actually in rural St. Mary, and her internet is down right now. I cannot reach her, and I have not been able to reach her for some time. And she is an elderly woman that I would like to meet, because she's also fantastic and a creative as well. This issue of safety and security, I think both you and Mr. Vera spoke to this really critically. It has the power to empower and disempower, as you said. And that training, if we get the entrepreneurship training and the web development training, we also allow women to be part of the training, because women have been part of the development of the internet for some time. You don't only need to look at Hidden Figures, and again, art demonstrating where women, Black women, all women, non-necessarily, we also have that video, that movie that is slipping me now, that talked about the critical role that a gay man played in using technology to support the end of a war, right? So looking at the way in which marginalized people have been critical in our sustainable development, in our civilization through art. So we really have to highlight those women leaders who are in the digital sector, as you said, and we need to do that. And why not do it through the art? The question for the group is, what are the main challenges and most needed measures in terms of ensuring that artists and cultural professionals can better benefit from intellectual property rights, especially copyrights? And you spoke to this a bit, Mr. Natu, in the digital environment. So why don't we start with you? And I'm not sure if Ms. Taveras Pineda is still there. Yes, you are. So
Yes.
we'll start with you, Mr. Well, actually, do you mind if we do ladies first, and let's hear a bit more Spanish again?
No
And then
problem,
we
no
come
problem
back,
at all.
we come
No
back
problem
to
at all.
Jamaica with the beautiful Jamaican lilt.
All right.
Thank you. Mira, durante el Resili Art, ¿verdad? Que fue una actividad en el 2020 que creo que fue patrocinada por la UNESCO. Hubieron muchas intervenciones importantes sobre la necesidad de reimaginar el sector cultural. Entre ellas, cómo hay que reinventar y recrear los empleos, y yo añado las vías y formas de distribución para poder seguir siendo artistas en esta nueva realidad, ¿verdad? Porque esta es una nueva realidad después de la pandemia. Y de ahí yo pienso dos cosas. Primero, que todo el sistema de protección de los derechos de autor y propiedad intelectual deben repensarse y reimaginarse, tomando en cuenta el nuevo contexto y dentro de ese nuevo contexto, que las personas están valorando la accesibilidad a la información y los contenidos que nos brinda el Internet. Y entonces, yo entiendo que debemos repensar, y los artistas deben repensar, cómo es que van a proteger sus derechos a su propiedad intelectual y a sus derechos de autor. Pero a partir de esa realidad que la estamos viviendo. Porque seguimos viendo muchísimas formas de protección de derechos de autor que siguen siendo rotas y saltadas y asaltadas por los mismos usuarios. Entonces hay que repensar cómo, no lo sé, pero sí creo que hay que hacer un esfuerzo para repensar hacerla. Y la otra cosa que para mí es muy importante es que durante la última década las grandes plataformas en línea como Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok han producido millones de dólares. ¿En base a qué? A los contenidos que están produciendo los creadores, a los contenidos que están produciendo los artistas, al contenido publicado por sus usuarios. Entonces yo creo que es imprescindible empezar a promover la creación de plataformas de propiedad colectiva, donde las personas creadoras de contenido sean quienes decidan las reglas y las que se beneficien de eso. Entonces, yo creo que tenemos que recordar que el poder lo tiene quien está produciendo el contenido. Y para mí eso yo creo que sobre todo para la industria cultural es muy importante, porque están... Si tú le quitas a Twitter o a Facebook el contenido que estamos produciendo todos, ¿qué son? Una simple herramienta. Entonces hay que devolver el poder a quien lo tiene. Y yo creo que eso es muy importante. También hay que exigir planes desde los estados para promover y proteger las expresiones culturales en el ámbito cultural. Gracias.
Thank you so much for that. These are good. This is where we need to go, and we're taking notes about how we can also support. So over to you, Mr. Natu.
Okay, so, looking at, like, let me just start. But so back in 2019, I was in a band, and we had a logo and we had a name and the whole works. We were making music and we were sending out to the people. And it wasn't until we were consulted by a professional that we realized how reckless we were being. We're operating without any protection for intellectual property. And, this was scary to realize how easily our whole image, name, and music could have been, stolen right underneath our feet. And there probably wasn't all that much that we could have done about it, thank goodness we got some consulting. So I said this to say that, you know, one of the biggest challenges that artists and cultural professionals face in the digital environment, you know, as regards to intellectual properties, is just not knowing our rights are the right way to do things, you know, to protect yourself. And so what I want to do is I want to just share a few you know, anecdotes with you, you know, to kind of reiterate this point. So back in around 2018, I think, and I was finding my way and my voice as a visual artist. I remember coming across a client who wanted me to do a commission. I charged him a fee, but then after the commission was done, you know, the client got this bright idea to want to do reproductions of the work, because in their mind, they paid for it, so it was theirs. I had to tell them that, you know, this wasn't the case, and there had to be a separate agreement, you know, if they wanted a complete buyout of my work. And I don't remember, you know, what happened to that project, you know, but to be honest, if I had a better understanding of how intellectual property rights work, then, you know, confronting this client would have been, you know, a much less scary experience, you know, because even though I knew deep down I was within my right to tell them that they can't do that, it still felt daunting to act on these rights, because I didn't really know, you know, exactly what these rights were, you know. And I think around 2016 I was working as an architectural technician, and then I would have friends who would tell me about rogue clients who they did designs for. They'll mention that some of these clients would want to sell their designs to a third party without any compensation to them. I wondered to myself, like, how is this legal? You know, it's not legal. I don't. That can't be legal. So everything came full circle to me around crystal clear in around 2021, when I became an architectural photographer. And then after studying that business, I began to understand a bit more on intellectual property. I started to understand that when a photographer takes an image, you know, they are the ones who own the copyright to that photo. And what a photographer does is license this image to the client. This can be a 5-year or, you know, a perpetual period, but this license is limited and non-transferable to any third party most of the time, unless they have a separate buyout agreement. So the client can use the image for their personal use. Say for instance, you take a photo of a bathroom and a tiling company whose products are being shown wants to use the image. They have to come to the photographer for permission. The client can just give them that image. Now, after realizing this, it became clear how much as artists we don't really know we don't know all the rights on our intellectual property. And I do think that there needs to be more, you know, campaigns and you know, some more workshops that can give us this knowledge, you know, and I think that can help solve the problem. So thank you.
Thank you both so much. A panel of two and such a rich panel discussion. And I think one thing that will continue to stay with me, at least, is not knowing the right way to do things, not only for artists, but also for clients. I think we need public education so that people understand what it means to create and what the value of the created work actually is, and tying that into the digital environment so that we also are protecting ourselves when we go online. As Mr. Veras Pineda had said, I mean, TikTok would not be as successful as it is without creatives who were not necessarily protecting themselves and their products. We need the legislation to be in place to represent, so that even if you don't know, you can still make sure that the legislation is that safety net as well to protect you and your product. And a lot of this goes to what both of you spoke to and our last set of panelists spoke to, which is there is a lack of respect right now for the creative industry. This may be a legacy of the kind of colonialism that was experienced within our space. It may be a legacy of the fact that there's a lack of respect for women's work. And maybe that is also a legacy of the kind of colonialism that was experienced in our space with regards to misogyny and homophobia. And so the creative work is seen as soft. The care work is seen as soft, and you don't necessarily see it as a critical way in which we evolve and thrive as a society and as a region. So I want to thank all of you artists. You've given us a lot of food for thought. Those of us who seek to serve you and the region, I hope you've been able to learn from one another. Those of you who have questions, as I indicated, please put it in the Q&A. That's the way in which we're able to see your questions. We've been able as well to overcome the challenges of technology and language, because art is that one thing that continuously connects us to one another, where we see one another, we hear one another, and the language does not become a divider. It is actually a connector. And that's the power of our creative contribution and your creative contribution. I want to thank all of you for your courage. There are many of us failed artists who went the other route because we weren't courageous enough to go the route of the creative industry. And so kudos to you. Thank you for sticking with us. I have to leave. I'm sorry. I had a hard out at 1 o'clock, so I didn't want to stop panel 3 short. And I am supposed to be moderating all 3 panels, but I am very pleased to hand over to the more than capable Paula Istruez, who is the program specialist for the social and human science sector for UNESCO and the Caribbean cluster, and she will be moderating session 3. I do want to say right before I go, for all of you, I hope you know about the Commission on the Status of Women, which happens every year, where civil society and governments get together. The priority theme for 2023 is innovation and technology. Actually, innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. If this is to happen, the creative and cultural industry needs to be a part of it. So I do hope that you liaise amongst yourselves and with your government colleagues to make sure that whatever declaration comes out of Latin America and the Caribbean reflects your thoughts on what needs to be in there. Thank you so much. UN Women and UNESCO, this is not the last you'll hear of us. We have taken what you've said into consideration, and we will be back in touch with opportunities for the kinds of trainings that you've spoken to. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And again, thank you for all of your time. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Ms. Broadbent, for this excellent moderation. I hope I can do do justice to the work that she's been doing before. As she said, my name is Paula Istruez, and I'm the program specialist for the social and human sciences sector at the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, and I'm also the focal point for gender. And we're very happy to continue with this event today, and we're going to enter our third and final session of the morning, which is going to be focused on the participation of women in cultural life, which is key to advance sustainable development. And for this, we have 3 guests with us today. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then we're going to start with the questions. So our first guest is Ms. Adelina Pacquiao. Again, if I made a mistake with the name, please don't hesitate to correct me. Ms. Pacquiao is an enthusiast Mopan Maya of Punta Gorda town from Belize. And she has a degree of water treatment and environmental science from the Utah Valley State College in the United States of America. And she is currently a member of the Fagina Crafts Center Association of Belize. And she has also previously worked as a manager and customer service representative for medical centers and insurance companies. And she is really motivated to help serve and empower Indigenous Mayan women in her hometown in Belize. We're also joined by Ms. Pamela Burnside. She is from the Bahamas, and she's a cultural advocate. She has 2 bachelor degrees, one in English and the other one is in fashion textiles. And she's the owner manager of Dungalik Studios, which is a creative design entity. She's also the secretary of Transforming Spaces, an art-based nonprofit organization, and is the co-founding president of Creative Nassau, which is a nonprofit community organization which promotes Bahamian art and culture. Which secured in 2014 membership for Nassau as a city of crafts and folk art in the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. And finally, we're also joined with Ms. Pascale Solage. Bienvenue. She holds a degree in gender and development from the Catholic University of Louvain, and in partnership with the training center Le Mont Selon les Femmes in Belgium. She has a degree in human rights education. She's also been a member of the cabinet for the Ministry of Women's Affairs and Women's Rights, as well as the Minister of Women's Affairs and Women's Rights for two ministers. She is the founding member and general coordinator of the feminist organization Nejes Marun, which was founded in 2015, and she represented the women's sector for 2 years in the multi-sectoral coordination committee of the Global Fund in Haiti for HIV/AIDS. And as a journalist, she also works for several radios and television programs. So thank you so much for joining us today. The first question that I will have is for Ms. Solage. Bienvenue. Our first question is, well, based on your experience and the work that you have done, how can cultural policies be strengthened, and how can cultural and creative actors, when we look from grassroots to national level, equally and actively contribute to the formulation, implementation, and monitoring of gender-oriented public policies and measures in general that can foster equal participation in cultural life?
Bonjour tout le monde. Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez parce que je suis sur le channel français, parce que je parle français. Donc, est-ce que tout le monde m'entend? Okay. Allô? D'accord. OK, donc j'espère que sur le channel anglais, on m'entend aussi avec la traduction. Donc, bonsoir tout le monde. Merci pour l'invitation et je suis vraiment très contente d'avoir pu suivre toutes les autres interventions qui ont été faites avant et je suis vraiment édifiée par tout ce qui a été partagé. Donc, comme je l'ai dit dans ma présentation, je suis la cofondatrice et la coordonnatrice générale d'une organisation féministe en Haïti qui est Neges Marun, mais principalement la particularité de cette organisation et qui centre cette institution au centre du débat d'aujourd'hui, c'est que c'est une organisation féministe qui travaille principalement à travers l'art. Et pour nous, c'était un moyen de croiser non seulement la question de nos plaidoyers pour les droits des femmes de manière multidimensionnelle en Haïti, mais aussi de l'aligner sur justement la place des femmes, les femmes comme actrices et sujets dans l'espace culturel à travers la culture, à travers les arts, pour pouvoir mener plus loin le combat pour leurs droits et notamment pour les opportunités. Donc, par rapport à mon expérience et bien avant cela, puisque j'ai été journaliste pendant plusieurs années et que j'ai aussi travaillé beaucoup à travers le secteur culturel haïtien, quels sont les moyens qui devraient être mis en place justement pour renforcer les politiques? Je dois placer d'abord cette question dans le contexte de mon pays et dans le contexte de l'espace où je travaille. C'est que malheureusement, avant même de penser à comment renforcer, il faut penser à créer. Parce que malheureusement, en Haïti, il n'y a pas du tout cette dynamique de politique culturelle. C'est vrai que la culture est notre premier ambassadeur à travers le monde. C'est vrai que individuellement, les femmes principalement, que ce soit à travers la musique, l'écriture, la danse et d'autres champs, vraiment explosent au niveau international. Mais au niveau structurel et au niveau politique, malheureusement, il n'y a pas de mise en place, il n'y a pas de structuration au niveau des politiques qui devraient être mises en place pour aider justement à ce niveau-là. Je vais donner des éléments simples et qui pourront vous guider par rapport à cela. Le nouveau budget qui vient d'être voté en Haïti, pour le ministère de la Culture, on a 1,1% du budget qui est alloué au ministère de la Culture. Pour le ministère à la condition féminine et aux droits des femmes, on a 0,1% du budget. Et on parle d'un budget de 214 milliards de gourdes, donc vraiment moins de 200 millions de dollars américains pour un pays de 12 millions d'habitants et avec plus de 52% de femmes. Donc, ça veut dire que les deux institutions au plus haut niveau de l'État et avec le plus grand pouvoir d'action et d'influence qui devraient pouvoir être mobilisées pour pouvoir avancer sur les politiques culturelles et notamment avancer sur les politiques qui sont plus inclusives pour les femmes, pour leur permettre d'être au centre du travail, au centre des actions au niveau culturel. Malheureusement, ces deux institutions sont traitées en parents pauvres. Et ces deux institutions, malheureusement, ne sont pas structurées pour faire le travail qu'elles devraient faire en termes de politique publique, en termes de dynamisation de politique, pour pouvoir permettre d'avancer à ce niveau-là. Et il y a aussi toute la faiblesse au niveau, en Haïti, de l'espace parlementaire. Aujourd'hui, en Haïti, nous n'avons aucun élu. Nous n'avons pas de parlement parce que leurs mandats ont expiré. Le président a été assassiné il y a presque un an. Et après l'assassinat du président, déjà bien avant, le Parlement était caduc. Donc, il n'y a pas de Parlement en Haïti. Et tous les pouvoirs locaux sont aussi arrivés à terme. Et il n'y a pas eu d'élection en Haïti depuis presque 6 ans. C'est-à-dire qu'en fait, il n'y a aucun espace de pouvoir légitime où justement ce plaidoyer, ces actions pourraient être prises pour améliorer les politiques par rapport à la question posée. Donc, si on considère le contexte global, déjà c'est un contexte difficile pour avancer sur comment renforcer ou améliorer non seulement des politiques culturelles, mais aussi des politiques culturelles qui favorisent la question du genre, l'inclusion des femmes, la visibilité des femmes. Donc déjà, le contexte est extrêmement difficile puisque c'est un pays extrêmement patriarcal, c'est un pays extrêmement conservateur et c'est aussi un système qui, de manière transversale, influence le secteur culturel. Ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, les femmes ont moins de ressources, les femmes ont moins d'opportunités, les femmes ont moins d'espace, les femmes ont moins de légitimité malgré le fait qu'elles portent vraiment sur leur dos tout un secteur culturel. Si vous voyez un petit peu tout ce qui se fait au niveau de la littérature haïtienne aujourd'hui, au niveau contemporain, la musique et tout, les femmes, elles sont omniprésentes, elles brillent au niveau international, mais c'est plus une portée individuelle qu'une portée collective qui est renforcée par des politiques, des moyens et des actions qui sont mises en place en Haïti. Donc, pour répondre à la question de se dire quelles seraient à tous les niveaux les actions qui pourrait être prise, ce serait de commencer par cela. Ce serait d'abord de commencer par instaurer une gouvernance active en Haïti pour commencer. Donc, à partir de là, avoir une redynamisation des institutions parce qu'aujourd'hui, on a pratiquement un dysfonctionnement total des institutions étatiques en Haïti. Et donc, à ce niveau-là, on pourrait commencer par se dire comment ces politiques culturelles non seulement peuvent être mises en place à partir de moyens, puisqu'il faut aussi des moyens pour le faire, mais aussi que ces institutions sont redynamisées et arrivent à remplir leur rôle. Donc, la première chose, c'est ça, c'est qu'il y ait vraiment une redynamisation, un fonctionnement effectif des institutions en Haïti et notamment des institutions étatiques qui elles-mêmes sont à la base des actions pour établir, renforcer et garder les politiques et notamment les politiques culturelles. Donc, ça, c'est au niveau des acteurs politiques, on va dire au plus haut niveau. Maintenant, au niveau des acteurs culturels et créatifs, de la base au niveau national, comme vous dites, ce serait d'abord qu'il y ait vraiment un plaidoyer pour imposer un agenda, pour imposer les besoins et pour imposer les actions qui doivent être prises pour renforcer ces politiques culturelles. Et malheureusement, en Haïti, le contexte se prête malheureusement à autre chose. Je vais encore donner d'autres éléments qui vont vous éclairer. Nous avons eu un président qui a été musicien pendant plus de 30 ans de sa vie avant de devenir président. Au niveau du Parlement, nous avons eu plein d'artistes qui sont devenus parlementaires par rapport à leur popularité, etc. Et beaucoup de journalistes aussi. Mais malheureusement, aucun de ces acteurs politiques n'ont pris des actions pour renforcer ce secteur, pour renforcer les politiques et pour renforcer aussi les mécanismes qui pourraient non seulement mener à des politiques culturelles solides, mais aussi pour permettre que ce soit plus inclusif, pour permettre que ça prenne en compte la dimension genrée dans un pays vraiment extrêmement oppressif pour les femmes et notamment à ce niveau. Donc, il faudrait que ces acteurs à tous les niveaux, dans tous les secteurs, dans tous les espaces, arrivent à représenter de manière globale un groupe qui arrive à faire pression, un groupe qui arrive à pousser un plaidoyer, à pousser un agenda pour que des politiques culturelles arrivent vraiment à être mises en place et renforcées. Je vais vous donner un autre exemple. En Haïti, le métier d'artiste, ça n'existe pas. Je veux dire que vous ne pouvez pas aller dans une banque, vous ne pouvez pas aller dans une institution et on vous demande votre métier, vous dites que vous êtes comédienne, vous êtes chanteuse, ça n'existe pas. Je veux dire, en Haïti, ce n'est même pas reconnu comme des métiers. Donc, il n'y a aucune mesure qui est prise pour que ces gens puissent bénéficier, que ce soit de protection sociale, que ce soit d'opportunités, que ce soit d'ouverture sur le monde, que ce soit de manière globale, tout ce qui peut résulter d'une politique culturelle, parce que ce n'est pas du tout pris en compte. Vous ne pouvez pas ouvrir un compte en banque, par exemple, en disant que vous faites partie de ce secteur-là, parce que ça n'existe pas. Par contre, nous avons en Haïti le Bureau haïtien du droit d'auteur, mais malheureusement, qui n'est pas non plus trop fonctionnel. Donc, il faudrait aussi à ce niveau que ce soit les différentes institutions décentralisées soient renforcées pour qu'elles puissent faire leur travail. Et par exemple, une institution comme le Bureau haïtien du droit d'auteur, ce serait premièrement de protéger les intérêts des personnes qui sont à ce niveau-là, donc mettre en place une politique qui permette de protéger les œuvres, de protéger les intérêts des femmes et des hommes qui sont dans ce secteur, mais aussi de voir comment de manière transversale la question du patriarcat impose et impacte beaucoup plus les femmes qui sont dans ce secteur et mettre des moyens en place, des ressources en place pour permettre d'adresser de manière globale ces défis et ces obstacles que les femmes ou autres minorités ou autres groupes minoritaires puissent confronter à ce niveau-là. Et comment, pour la dernière partie de la question, dire comment la mise en œuvre et de suivi politique et de mesures axées sur le genre afin de favoriser une participation égale à la vie culturelle. Je viens de prendre l'exemple du ministère à la condition féminine et aux droits des femmes qui a été fondé en Haïti pour que de manière transversale, à tous les niveaux de la vie nationale, à tous les niveaux des décisions qui sont prises au niveau étatique et au niveau des espaces de pouvoir, les femmes puissent être prises en compte, puisque nous sommes plus de 52% de la population, mais nous sommes un pays vraiment très impacté par un système patriarcal, par un système conservateur. Je vais vous donner un exemple simple. En Haïti, il n'y a même pas de loi contre les violences faites aux femmes, il n'y a pas de loi contre le harcèlement, alors que nous savons que dans ces espaces-là, il y a beaucoup de cas de harcèlement, il y a beaucoup de cas de violence que les femmes et d'autres groupes minoritaires peuvent subir. Malheureusement, en Haïti, ce ne sont pas des choses qui sont prises en compte. Donc, le ministère à la condition féminine, qui devrait être une institution qui est vraiment renforcée pour pouvoir imposer des politiques, imposer des solutions, imposer des agendas pour pouvoir permettre aux femmes d'être plus présentes dans la vie culturelle, mais non seulement être plus présentes parce qu'elles sont déjà extrêmement présentes, malheureusement pas assez, mais surtout protégées. Parce que là, c'est le vrai défi et le vrai débat que nous avons aujourd'hui en Haïti. Notre organisation a réalisé, dans le cadre de la Journée nationale du mois des femmes haïtiennes le 3 avril dernier, un flash mob devant le ministère à la condition féminine, où nous avions à peu près 300 jeunes femmes qui étaient en train de danser devant le ministère à la condition féminine. Et c'était aussi pour nous une façon de dire à ce ministère que son rôle aussi, c'est d'imposer que les femmes puissent être plus présentes, plus protégées et plus favorisées dans tous les espaces et notamment, comme le dit la question, dans la vie culturelle. Donc, aujourd'hui, pour terminer et pour de manière globale porter une réponse par rapport à mon expérience, parce que moi aussi, j'ai travaillé au ministère à la condition féminine pendant 4 ans. Et comme je l'ai dit, c'est un ministère qui n'a jamais eu 1% du budget national. Jamais. 0,1, 0,2, 0,3, jamais. Ça veut dire que, et ce n'est pas des budgets d'investissement, c'est des budgets de fonctionnement. C'est-à-dire que c'est une institution qui n'a pas les moyens de sa politique pour pousser, ce que vous dites dans la question, des politiques qui permettent d'imposer plus de présence de femmes, plus de pouvoir de femmes, notamment dans la vie culturelle. Donc, il faudrait commencer par cela. Renforcer ces deux institutions, le ministère de la condition féminine, le ministère de la culture. Renforcer les institutions décentralisées, le Bureau haïtien du droit d'auteur, les différentes directions nationales, tout ce qui d'une manière globale pourrait avoir un impact sur le travail d'imposer et de renforcer des politiques publiques à ce niveau-là. Et puis, au niveau de la société civile, au niveau des différents secteurs, créer des contre-pouvoirs, créer des groupes de pression, créer des groupes qui poussent des agendas, et notamment des groupes qui sont gender responsive ou bien qui portent un agenda aussi féministe par rapport à la question pour que la question genrée puisse être de manière effective et efficace prise en compte. Mais sinon, à ce niveau-là, en Haïti, comme je l'ai dit, c'est difficile d'imposer une politique puisque nous n'avons pas de parlement, nous n'avons pas d'exécutif, nous n'avons pas de pouvoir local. Donc, de manière globale, c'est comment renforcer la gouvernance de manière globale dans notre pays et de pouvoir, à ce niveau-là, faire notre travail pour imposer ces changements que nous voulons, pour imposer justement la place des femmes Et pas seulement en termes de représentation stérile, mais la place des femmes avec un pouvoir réel, un pouvoir de décision et d'orientation de leur travail au centre de la vie culturelle en Haïti. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Pascal, pour les informations et pour donner aussi un peu de contexte en Haïti. Je vais changer en anglais. And thank you so much for presenting and also providing this global context on Haiti and the importance not only to even think about, before thinking about implementation of cultural policies, even the fact of creating culture policies in those contexts where they do not exist, but also to reflect on the importance of strengthening the capacities of institutions to conduct this role of ensuring that women's rights are, advanced and protected. But I think it was also important, Pascal, when you mentioned the role that gender institutes, the gender ministries have in ensuring throughout, in countries to also ensure that throughout the rights of women are promoted and protected. And so that was also important. It's not only a one-sided view. So thank you so much for this presentation and as well for the specific context of Haiti. My next question would be for Adelina Pacquiao. Please, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the last name. My question is focused, so although efforts have been made to ensure the basis for more diverse and inclusive societies, enabling to create a more vibrant cultural environment, according to your experience in the work that you've done, how can cultural policies be designed to respond more effectively to the needs of the most vulnerable and those that are at risk of being left behind, for example, Indigenous women, migrant women, women with disabilities?
Good morning, everyone, and our moderator, Ms. Paola. It's a pleasure for me to be attending this Zoom meeting with UNESCO. Well, I know there's still a lot that needs to be done to include women in sustainable development, in cultural roles and policies. Take, for example, the Fahina Group Center that I am a member of. We need a lot of trainings because we need to know how to produce quality work. And most of what we do at Fahina are handcrafted products. They are locally made. So everything is handmade. We need to be able to know that in order for us to be competitive out in the marketplace, in the business area, we need to be able to produce quality products. So we need trainings in quality products. We also need to be able to know how to label our products and pricing of our products, because it takes time to produce these things. Sometimes we tend to underprice our products. So we need training in those areas. Again, we need technology. Technology is another limitation for us. Everything is based now on social media. Everything is put on social media platform. And a lot of us don't have access to that. That's another gap that they can look at, because most of the women that are in our group are from the rural areas and they don't have access to that technology. We don't know, especially during and after the COVID pandemic, up to now, we still don't have access to these. And due to that COVID, everything has changed. So everything is now digitally. And we don't have the means or we don't have the training to use these platforms. And we need to know that this is much easier and it's more cost effective, because sometimes these people, most of them are from the rural areas. They need to travel miles away in order for them to come into town to sell their products. But if they had this access to this technology, they can post them instantly, and everything is done through, social media. Another limitation is their financial resources. Most of the times, grants and loans come, but they don't know about it because they need to write proposals, and most of them don't have that ability to read or write. So they need assistance, they need guidance, they need somebody to assist them with those trainings and those, how to get these finances. Because again, everything is done through social media, and not being able to have access to this technology is a great setback for them. Another limitation is building resources. Some of us are not members of an organization or a group, so we are left on our own, and there is no building structure, no building infrastructure that is there for them to go out and market their products. So FAHINA is there, and hopefully in the future, we can assist our indigenous women in purchasing their products so that they don't need to travel far away, because they have that responsibility of taking care of their children, being the mother, the father sometimes, because some of them are single mothers, and they need to be able to improve themselves and provide for their family. So again, transportation is another setback also, sometimes due to bad weather, and especially down south of the country. The roads are very terrible, and they don't have access. Sometimes the roads are flooded, they cannot reach. And so they are left out because they cannot reach their destination to sell their products. So with all of these things, these are limitations that are still missing, and that women need to be included in mobilizing their creativity for sustainable development in these cultural environments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pato, for your insights. I think you've done an interesting analysis in the sense that a one-size-fits-all approach to cultural policies is not always effective, but rather specific actions that are targeted to women in certain population groups, whether it be indigenous women or women that are women with disabilities, that the policies have to be also developed to target and address the limitations and the needs of the faith, which you have highlighted in your intervention, and also by recognizing the realities of these women. They're not homogeneous. It's women that are facing certain duties of care, women that are single parents. So this is also important to consider when ensuring that women are also participating in cultural life. So thank you so much for your intervention. I would then like to hand over the floor to Ms. Burnside. And my question for you, Mrs. Burnside, is according to the work that you have been advancing in the cultural and creative field, what is the role that international and intergovernmental organizations can play in stepping forward to advance gender equality in the field of culture and in the creative and cultural industries?
Good afternoon, and thank you. Let me begin by extending my thanks to the Bahamas National Commission for UNESCO and to the organizers of this event for the invitation to participate today. In 2021, the world female population was 49.6%. And according to the World Data Atlas, in Bahamas, women make up 51.4% of the population. It is my belief that women on the whole, and as a result of their gender, continue to demonstrate a strong determination to succeed regardless of circumstances. The cultural and creative industries, which I will refer to as the arts, are actually industries which are great gender levelers. Yet another reason why they are so important. This opinion was also reinforced by the 4 nonprofit organization leaders, all women, whom I consulted for this presentation about the Bahamas. And the following snapshots that are based on 3 Bahamian art forms that I am intimately involved with adequately illustrate that gender inequality in the Bahamian arts arena is not a major issue. First, our indigenous straw craft industry, which is a part of our African heritage dating back to the 18th century. This industry was originally non-gender specific, since men, women, and children actively participated throughout many generations. Fast forward now to 2017, and of the 517 craft stalls in the Nassau straw market, 92.6% of them were assigned to women. In the University of the Bahamas' 2019-2020 academic year, the percentage of female graduates in the creative arts and culinary arts were 55.6% and 83.3% respectively. Similarly, in a crafts trade show that I was involved in that was held in December 2020, 87% of 136 applicants were women. Now talking about the Bahamian visual arts field. This developed in the late 1900s in the Bahamas and was originally comprised of all male artists. In fact, the first all-Bahamian art documentary featured 11 male artists, no women, and this produced some flack in the community afterwards. But as we say in the Bahamas, we show them better than we can tell them. Using the publications Love and Responsibilities, Volume 1 and 2, that feature artworks owned by one of our prominent Bahamian art collectors, out of the 215 Bahamian artists featured in the first volume that was produced in 2012, 37% were women. By the second volume, issued in 2021, female participation had increased to 47%. In the meantime, there have been 4 female directors heading the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, which opened in 1996. One male who operated on an interim basis, and one male now who is presently operating on a part-time basis. And of the 9 galleries now operational in Nassau, 5 of them are run by women. Finally, in Junkanoo, which is our country's indigenous street festival, also a centuries-old African tradition started in the 1880s. This was also a purely male-dominated parade. In 1953, a female entertainer dared cross a gender barrier by bringing a group of female dancers to perform in the parade. And it was not until the late 1980s that female choreographed dancers were reintroduced. Nowadays, the participation of women, estimated to be at 40%, is integral to the parades. The first woman to lead a large group was chosen in 2016, and she still remains the only one to hold such a position. These examples, I think, indicate that Bahamian women are holding their own in the arts in the Bahamas. However, we cannot negate the need for the assistance of international and intergovernmental organizations for the benefit of all in following areas. The compilation of a national cultural registry of the Bahamas' intangible cultural heritage assets. This is crucial to us moving forward. Secondly, our intellectual property and copyright issues, which are the backbone of the arts. The development of relevant laws for protection and enforcement in order to operate effectively and efficiently, particularly in a global arena, as was heard by some of the participants a little bit earlier. In the field of technology, I advocate strongly for an in-island e-commerce platform, and this is needed, I think, throughout the region, that will allow us to directly and seamlessly sell products internationally online. And the important aspect here is to retain some banking control and not be held hostage by international banking institutions. Also, training for the establishment of ongoing in-country research and data, which will allow us to accurately monitor, measure, and monetize development and economic trends in the arts, which is the foundation of the orange economy, as there is presently no data available. But here in the Bahamas, I know for sure. I think they're a little bit better in the Caribbean, in some of the islands, but this is something that is really needed in what we would call the third world, because the first world has it all in hand, and they can actually tell you what money is made by the creative arts. Creative Nassau initiated the first ever Orange Economy Survey in 2018, which presently has 500 respondents. Unfortunately, we did not ask it for gender indicators. The Department of Culture here in the Bahamas has also started to compile a creatives register. And finally, with regard to the gender inequality debate on issues of nationality, women's rights, healthcare, sexual violence, political participation, these are sadly very real still in us. So international agitation and education are really welcome to bring pressure to bear for updating our outdated laws and breaking down a modern-day patriarchy that is still strongly linked to religious dogma. And I would like to ask that you go on to Google a Equality Bahamas report that was issued in 2018 that has specific details dealing with issues of women and gender inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burnside, and for really sharing the impressive number and statistics of women participation in the cultural life in the Bahamas. And I think it shows the importance of having institutional mechanisms that are put in place to be able to actually capture this data and to be fostering the meaningful engagement and participation and advancement of women in the creative and cultural industry. So thank you so much for giving this overview and the role and the importance of institutions to advance this. So my final question for the group will be focused on what are the main challenges and the barriers to ensure artistic freedom and full participation of women in cultural life. So based on the conversation that we've had today, we've seen, for example, notions on the importance of strengthening institutional capacities, of actually developing certain norms and legislation, but as well as to look at the specificities of local level needs. So for example, I will hand over the floor to kind of explore a little bit more these challenges and barriers to ensure the full participation of women in cultural life. I'll ask first, for example, well, we can maybe move backwards. So I'll ask first Ms. Burnside, then Ms. Solage, and I'll finish with Ms. Pacquiao. So Ms.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So as a side to the question, I really have to admit that this preparation for this presentation has led me down multiple paths of very interesting possibilities provided, as always, through the arts. And maybe even, I would say, the rise of the Amazons for we women. And I trust that PM Mia Motley of Barbados is listening in. Go PM Motley. So my response to the question is that the arts are all about artistic freedom. The arts are all about life. They are an essential humanity channel through which citizens, both male and female, can direct and express their feelings, the good, the bad, and the ugly, whether socially, psychologically, or physically. Because creativity allows inquiry, it allows experimentation, awareness, possibility, release, and healing to occur. And examples abound. I am reminded of a century-based exhibition being held at our gallery. It was mounted by the mother of a blind child who made it possible for visually impaired individuals to visit our gallery for the very first time. It was such an impactful exhibition that brought tears to my eyes to see visually impaired people coming into the gallery and being able to feel the art. I mean, the expression on their face was just so very exciting. And we can think of many such examples, publications of poetry and prose that deal with issues of physical abuse, art shows dealing with violent death or grief or gender issues, musical lyrics that describe abuse. In fact, our National Art Gallery became a much-needed center for healing following the trauma of Hurricane Dorian and the challenges still arising from this pandemic. So circling back to the four previously mentioned female leaders of nonprofit civil society organizations who are on the ground working directly with people on issues of equality, gender, disability, and discrimination, it was telling that they all agreed on an overarching and challenging barrier. That is the disconnect between government and the people. And this refers to all genders, and specifically as it relates to the arts. And so the panelists have gone into detail with this as well. Because culture and creativity reside in the people. The people are its vessels. The people are its keepers. Within the people lies the well of our existence for strength, resilience, and survival. Without understanding the purpose of the power of monetizing the arts, that is, embracing the development of a thriving orange economy, and not being bold and confident enough to invest in we the people first, we as individual small island developing states, or collectively as a region, will continue to falter, as evidenced by the fact that governments and their agencies, and I have a list, do not have the same passion for advocacy as civil society groups. They are averse to sharing power and control. And deflective, and deal with difficult challenges. They are clueless about the importance of culture and creativity and how we should use the arts to brand, market, and promote ourselves as a country. They lack political will to assist, facilitate, fund, develop policies, and invest in capacity building. They frustrate rather than facilitate civil society's efforts. They do not collect and analyze enough data, all of which results in the country getting nowhere fast. There is no intention to embrace the paradigm shift needed to become the masters of our own fate, especially if we wish to operate in a global arena. We insist on remaining docile and inside the box, continuing to use the ever-growing mass tourism model, which directly hampers sustainability, a fact made painfully evident during these hard pandemic times. Our leaders, the powers that be, continue to be laser focused on the foreign direct investment model in the Caribbean, which keeps us dependent and shackled to foreign to survive. This is indeed a manifestation of mental slavery, and we have to ask ourselves, what are our intentions? Do we want to move backwards or forwards? There are presently 8 Caribbean cities in the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, a mere 2.7% of the whole. Let us unite for a common purpose and for the greater good by embracing the ginormous wealth of our art, culture, and heritage. I contend that Cara Festa at its best was the magnificent example of this. And I would like to end by making a clarion call to our regional colleagues to seriously consider turning inwards, to work from the bottom up, to drop your bucket where you stand. These are sayings of my grandparents. To see what you're looking at, to own your own, and to collaborate and build together, bound not by the shackles of mental slavery, but by the artistic freedom and power of our unique culture and creativity, which is the best in the world. As the region, it is awesome power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Burnside, for really highlighting the importance of different levels of actions that can be conducted from local level. So doing exhibitions that are focused on women and gender issues, but also the importance of having policies and institutions that work for the advancement of women and really pinpointing the importance of capturing data. I would ask the same question to Solange, Mr. Pascal. What would be, based on your experience, what are a few of the main challenges or barriers to ensure full participation of women in cultural life?
Allô? Allô, j'espère que vous m'entendez.
Oui, c'est bon, merci.
Allô? Ah oui, je voudrais juste qu'on reprenne la question. J'ai été obligée de me déplacer, donc c'est un petit peu plus bruyant là où je suis. Est-ce qu'on peut reprendre la question à laquelle je dois répondre? Parce qu'il y en avait quatre.
Oui, bien sûr. Non, la question, c'était surtout, est-ce qu'il y a des défis selon vos contextes et votre expérience pour assurer la participation des femmes dans les milieux culturels, par exemple en Haïti ou dans les Caraïbes?
Oui, alors absolument. Et au niveau de la Caraïbe et Haïti, je vais commencer par Haïti. Je pense que j'en ai abordé quelques-uns lorsque j'ai fait la première présentation. C'est que pour commencer, nous vivons dans un pays extrêmement patriarcal, extrêmement conservateur, malgré le fait que c'est un pays avec une population de femmes plus élevée, malheureusement, les droits, les opportunités, les chances, les espaces ne sont pas nécessairement accessibles aux femmes. Et quand elles arrivent justement à dépasser ces défis, ces obstacles, il y a beaucoup plus d'efforts, il y a beaucoup plus de barrières qu'elles doivent confronter pour pouvoir se faire une place dans ces milieux-là. Et ceci, quand je parle de milieu artistique, je parle ça de manière exhaustive, que ce soit au niveau de la musique, de la danse, de l'artisanat, de la peinture, etc. C'est vrai qu'on a des noms de grandes femmes qui ont fait de grandes choses et à travers les périodes dans le milieu de l'art haïtien, au niveau du secteur du milieu culturel haïtien, mais le fait que ce soit une société extrêmement patriarcale et conservatrice et vraiment avec des barrières énormes. Donc ça, c'est le premier défi que les femmes confrontent. Et moi, j'ai eu l'occasion de travailler en Guadeloupe, en Martinique et dans d'autres pays de la Caraïbe. C'est un peu les mêmes réalités. Il y a aussi la réalité du manque de ressources. Et il faut le prendre à plusieurs niveaux. Le manque de ressources dans le fait qu'il n'y a pas de ressources qui sont beaucoup allouées pour les femmes pour se faire une place et à ce niveau-là. Et en Haïti, principalement, on retrouve, pour les fonds dans ce secteur-là, on le retrouve principalement au niveau des organisations internationales, au niveau des coopérations internationales, au niveau des ambassades. Je veux dire qu'au niveau de l'État, au niveau du secteur privé, il y a très, très peu de moyens, très peu de ressources qui sont à la disposition des femmes qui sont dans le secteur culturel. Et le secteur privé qui met le plus de fonds que l'État, malheureusement, en Haïti, il y a toute une industrie qui a une orientation qui est majoritairement une orientation qui va à l'encontre des droits des femmes. Et donc, ces ressources sont orientées soit contre les droits des femmes ou bien vers les hommes ou bien pas du tout pour des minorités qui elles-mêmes arrivent tout simplement à avoir des défis pour exister en Haïti. Donc, ce qui fait que dans le contexte actuel où nous sommes et quand nous parlons de ressources, nous avons les ambassades, des coopérations internationales qui mettent des fonds, mais qui n'arrivent pas en Haïti, on nous appelle la République des ONG. C'est pour dire que ces fonds-là, c'est la plupart du temps, c'est des projets, c'est des programmes. Ce sont des initiatives sur à très court terme ou à moyen terme et qui ne donnent pas de résultats structurels, qui ne donnent pas des résultats pérennes sur le fait que les femmes puissent avoir vraiment les moyens et les espaces appropriés pour pouvoir avoir cette liberté artistique, cet espace pour pouvoir exprimer leur art en Haïti ou bien dans la Caraïbe. Ce qui fait que cet argent qui se retrouve en termes de ressources pour ce milieu culturel, malheureusement, n'arrive pas à avoir des répercussions sur le long terme. Maintenant, les ressources qui existent à d'autres niveaux, ils devraient être disponibles. Malheureusement, ce sont des ressources qui sont mises dans des espaces où les femmes ne sont pas admises. Par exemple, en Haïti, on a une domination de la musique compas. Par exemple, qui a le plus d'argent. On appelle le HMI, Haitian Music Industry. C'est le seul espace de musique où il y a, en tout cas, des ressources plus ou moins importantes. Et cet espace-là, c'est un espace presque exclusivement réservé aux hommes. Et les femmes qui arrivent à se faire place à ce niveau-là, ce sont des femmes qui sont obligées, qui n'ont pas cette liberté artistique parce qu'ils imposent un agenda, ils imposent un type d'art. Les femmes n'arrivent pas à être elles-mêmes dans cet espace-là. Il faut être dans une certaine ligne artistique pour pouvoir exister dans cette HMI, Haitian Music Industry, et c'est le seul espace de l'art culturel haïtien où il y a un ensemble de moyens qui ne viennent pas nécessairement de l'international ou bien qui ne soient pas sur le court terme ou le moyen terme. Une autre réalité qu'il y a aussi aujourd'hui et qui est un défi réel, c'est que près de 80% des artistes haïtiens vivent à l'étranger parce que malheureusement, il n'y a pas de marché en Haïti, il y a très peu de marché parce que c'est un pays qui confronte moi j'aime pas dire que c'est un pays pauvre, mais un pays appauvri. Donc, les gens n'ont pas nécessairement les ressources pour consommer l'art. Donc, ça veut dire que la plupart des artistes qui ont besoin d'avoir un marché pour pouvoir vivre et exister vivent à l'international et rentrent sur Haïti pour des initiatives bien particulières, le carnaval ou bien d'autres festivals, hier par exemple pour la fête du drapeau, etc. Mais ça veut dire que le marché qui brasse l'argent de l'art haïtien est à l'international. Les artistes ne sont pas enregistrés en Haïti, leurs ressources ne transitent pas par Haïti et beaucoup d'entre eux ne produisent pas non plus pour Haïti. Et dans un milieu avec tous ces défis, les femmes sont les moins favorisées, les femmes sont exclues parce que déjà, de manière préexistante, elles ont les défis. Je m'excuse, j'ouvre ma caméra maintenant parce que je viens de me déplacer. Elles ont les défis déjà préexistants qui sont là parce qu'elles sont déjà femmes dans ce milieu, mais déjà avec tous les défis dans le contexte global haïtien, ça défavorise aussi les femmes parce qu'en Haïti, malheureusement, les femmes sont la catégorie de la population la plus pauvre. Donc, tous ces défis préexistants et tout aussi ce machisme et aussi ce patriarcat qui est de manière transversale, ce conservatisme de manière transversale impacte plus durement les femmes. Et pour finir, à part que j'ai parlé des ressources financières, des ressources de manière globale qui sont à disposition, le contexte global haïtien, c'est que c'est aussi un espace où les femmes aussi vivent extrêmement de violence et de violence de toutes sortes. Et que ce soit des violences physiques, des violences émotionnelles, des violences verbales, psychologiques, parce que c'est un monde dominé par les hommes et c'est un monde aussi dominé par l'argent et la violence. Donc, les femmes font face à beaucoup de violences et malheureusement, je l'ai dit aussi au début de ma présentation, il n'y a pas de mécanisme en place pour permettre aux femmes de se défendre. En Haïti, il n'y a même pas de loi contre les violences faites aux femmes, il n'y a pas de loi contre le harcèlement et il n'y a aucun mécanisme qui est mis en place pour protéger les femmes dans ce milieu-là, mais aussi défendre leurs intérêts. Parce que j'ai parlé aussi du Bureau haïtien du droit d'auteur, j'ai parlé des institutions décentralisées. Donc, il y a beaucoup d'abus qui sont faits aux femmes par rapport à leur management, par rapport à la gestion de leurs ressources, par rapport aux places qu'elles peuvent occuper dans les espaces et par rapport aussi des ressources disponibles. Donc, il y a un ensemble de défis. Aujourd'hui, les femmes qui sont dans le théâtre en Haïti existent en Europe. De la peinture, de la littérature existent en Europe. Toutes les femmes qui font beaucoup de succès, leurs maisons d'édition sont en Europe. Donc, c'est un autre public qui les consomme et pas Haïti parce qu'il n'y a pas de marché, il n'y a pas d'institution et il n'y a pas de ressources non plus. Donc, quand tu n'es pas favorisé ou bien dans une certaine ligne, c'est très difficile de pouvoir percer et donc les défis, les obstacles sont énormes. Mais ce qui est magnifique à voir, c'est que malgré cette tempête, on retrouve tellement de femmes qui arrivent à impacter de manière vraiment extraordinaire l'activité culturelle haïtienne, l'art haïtien, la culture haïtienne. Et comme je l'ai dit, c'est notre premier ambassadeur. Mais les défis sont là, mais elles arrivent à traverser les barrières et à imposer un petit peu leur présence dans divers espaces, mais vraiment de très, très loin, beaucoup plus.
Merci beaucoup pour la réponse. I'm going to change to English. Thank you so much for the response. And I think it's really interesting where you mentioned, well, we have to continue to dismantle and the patriarchy, but also the importance of having sustainable funding sources. So there's the difference between, very small funding sources that are project-based, but how do you ensure that this funding is sustainable throughout to allow for these entrepreneurship ventures to develop? And as well as the importance of creating spaces for women by women that where women feel safe and supported. And there was a mention earlier today about boys clubs, which are only for men. And so how do we create spaces for women to support each other as well? And finally, there's also the interesting reference to intersecting factors. So it's not that we can just only look at the creative and cultural industries as a silo, but really there's other factors that are involved, such as violence against women, poverty levels that women face, women in certain situations of vulnerability, and even duties of care. And in that light, I'll then I think that makes a good transition to Ms. Pacquiao and her work in Indigenous communities. And for example, just to conclude this section, if you could let us know other challenges or how can we really ensure the full participation of women in cultural life in the Caribbean.
Good morning. Once again, well, there are still many challenges and barriers to women in cultural life, especially here in Southern Toledo. The most or major role that we notice here is women are still considered to be the main role for them is to take care of the household and be with the children, because that is their belief and customs that they should not take on responsibilities outside of the home. So they don't have access to education. Some of them are not allowed to go out and work on their own. So they don't have that exposure because of their belief and their customs. It's mostly the male that goes out and does everything, because the primary role of the women are considered to be staying at home and taking care of the children and do everything else. And because they are limited to those exposure, they cannot be in leadership positions and they don't have that decision making to be on their own and decide for themselves. So again, that's a cultural belief, a cultural custom that the women still face here. Again, communication, they don't have access to these digital technologies due to their access or where they live in. So they don't know that they have all these other medias that they can use in expressing themselves and going out in a marketplace. So therefore, if they are to stay at home, they need to be able to use that platform to help improve their lives as well as their children, to know that they can still do business from home. Education is another setback for them. Some of them, because they haven't been to school, they don't know to read and write. So they don't know how to express themselves. They don't have that knowledge. So many times they can't go out and attend trainings because some of them have this language barrier also, that they don't speak the language and there is no nobody to help them along, to assist them. So sometimes they don't even know their basic human rights. They don't know what they're entitled to. Some of them are in some abusive relationships. Again, they don't know where to report these domestic violence. They don't know how. And even if they try, somewhere along the lines, they get turned around and they just go back and they stay within their comfort zone because they're afraid to speak up, because they don't have that exposure. Industry, we don't have any industries here. So women, even though we are creative, we know what we want, we know how to do it, but there is no industry for us to go out. No small business. We don't know, there's no employment opportunities for them. But if there was an industry, because some of them know how to sew, some of them know how to do their culinary, their local cuisine, and they can showcase their talent if there's this industry where they can be able to show their creativeness, their knowledge, and train other people or teach them. And in doing that, they can be earning their income also to provide for their family. Another challenge and barrier for them is that women are not entitled to land. They don't have any land documents in their name because, again, it is said to be owned by the male partners. So the women, even if they wanted to expand their small business, if they wanted to send their children to school and have that education, they are unable to do that because they don't have these assets that they can take to the bank to find loan or fundings to be able to help themselves and to be able to provide for their families. So these are all the challenges and barriers that women still face down here in the south of Belize and these indigenous people. And in order for them to feel included, they need to go out, they need that support for them to be able to do all of these things.
Thank you so much, Pacquiao, for sharing this very specific perspective. And from your intervention, I think some of the key points would be to really ensure that there's exposure and participation of women to cultural environments, to continue to transform harmful stereotypes and gender norms. You know, this idea where you were mentioning that women are staying at home while men are breadwinners, this also has to change so that women are further empowered. And you mentioned the importance of education and TVET, which is actually also discussed in another segment earlier today. So again, we see the importance of ensuring that capacities are developed throughout one's life. And again, the importance of really looking at holistic solutions to advance gender equality and the participation of women in cultural life, for example, by reducing poverty levels and what you said, by having access to land and land rights. It's just, we cannot look at it from a one-side perspective. With that, I wanted to thank our guests, our speakers for today for this really enriching conversation. And the same thing, we want to extend our gratitude to all our wonderful guests today for sharing your insights and for this valuable exchange. We have had an enriching conversation that was, went from women training and capacity development, then looking at the guide and the gender divide in the digital environment, and then looking at women, the participation of women in cultural life. So we're very thankful for our guests for sharing their insights and their experience from across the Caribbean. Based on the outcomes of this conversation today, we will have a working document that will be circulated and shared online to kind of just highlight the main challenges and recommendations and findings from this very enriching debate. We also want to extend our gratitude to UN Women for this partnership. As Ms. Broadbent said, this is not the last you see of us working together. And as well, we also want to extend our gratitude to the European Union, who are strong champions and believe in advancing women's rights in the creative and cultural industries across the Caribbean through their Transcultura project. And we also invite you to continue to follow UNESCO and to follow UN Women on social media to see any future opportunities for engagement. We, through the Transcultura project, there's lots of capacity development opportunities that are coming up for creatives across the Caribbean. So this will be shared through our social media. And we thank you so much again for bearing with us for the technical difficulties. And thank you again for your participation. And we wrap up. Thank you so much.